Chapter 629. Faced with King Yang-chio's invitation, Wu Qi was about to reply when his heart suddenly twitched. A huge amount of blood rushed to his head, and a feeling of uneasiness rose in his heart. Not daring to be careless, Wu Qi gave King Yang-chio a fierce glare, then quickly glanced at the storage ring on his finger that was gleaming with a faint dark light. In the end, he did not dare to take it off, so he twisted his body and transformed into a wisp of smoke, vanishing without a trace. King Yang-chio stared at Wu Qi in surprise and murmured to himself, "If I had told you that I could scare you away by recruiting you, why did I have to suffer this humiliation?" Frowning, King Yang-chio gritted his teeth and said, "King Zhang-chio, you son of a bitch. I can't believe you have someone like this as your subordinate." "Good, very good. I'll find him and get my hands on him." "You bastard. You left me here. What should I do now? What should I do?" The star shark blade that had entangled King Yang-chio in his spiritual ocean had disappeared with Wu Qi's escape, but the immortal detaining needles were still tightly entangling his body. King Yang-chio could not use any strength at all. His limbs and bones were shattered by Wu Qi, and his aura was scattered by a powerful technique. All he could do was lie in the dark underwater cave and sigh. After about a quarter of an hour, countless ghostly wails and wolf howls suddenly rang out in the surroundings. A ferocious and tyrannical aura came whistling down from the sky. Vaguely, a ferocious-looking beast that looked like a true dragon but had a shorter body than a slender and graceful true dragon could be vaguely seen flashing past. King Yang-chio was overjoyed. He recognized the beast. It looked exactly like Yazi, the beast soul of Yugu. The 3,600 layers of restrictive spells that isolated aura and sound that Wu Qi had laid out shattered with a boom. Huge waves as high as 100 miles were thrown into the surroundings, and dozens of nearby islands were shattered. The wave lifted King Yang-chio high into the air, and a cold divine sense swept through him. Then, a big, skinny hand tore through the void, grabbed King Yang-chio, and dragged him over to the other side. Yugu finally found that King Yang-chio was not in his supreme tower, and no one knew where he had gone. Shocked, he immediately used his strongest power to search for King Yang-chio's whereabouts. Following the protective spell he had left in King Yang-chio's soul, Yugu found King Yang-chio's approximate location almost immediately. Without hesitation, he used his divine ability to travel hundreds of millions of miles across, destroying all the islands and shallow seabed within 1,000 miles with one palm strike, and rescuing King Yang-chio. Thousands of miles away, Wu Qi, who had transformed into a primordial mystifying hoe and spat out a large amount of mirage chi to conceal his presence, looked at the Yazi's shadow that was rushing down from the sky and could not help but sigh. The Supreme Oracle, the ultimate deterrent of the Deyu dynasty, could still display such mighty power from hundreds of millions of miles away. The power of such an almighty expert was truly enviable. Just now, when he was in the cave, his heart suddenly contracted and his blood and energy fluctuated. It was the divine ability of divine sense that was often used by the ancient immortals. Although his magic power and cultivation base were still at the realm of heaven immortal, the scroll of stealing he was cultivating, the Song of Gale, the Darkeen Water scripture, the Inferno Hell Fiend scripture, and other scriptures were all top-grade mystic arts from the immortal sections. In fact, his cultivation base had surpassed his current cultivation base, and he had broken through the realm of heaven immortal. With the cultivation base of a gold immortal, even if he had just stepped through the threshold of the realm, Wu Qi would have this kind of divine sense of foreboding when a crisis that concerned his vital interests came. Relatively speaking, King Yang-chio's fleshly body was extremely strong, and his overall strength was strong enough to compete with the strongest gold immortals. However, human warriors did not cultivate their souls or form their nascent divinities, so they could not practice any divine ability. That was why Wu Qi was able to plot against King Yang-chio, and even kidnap him without any warning from King Yang-chio. This was the reason why Wu Qi was able to plot against King Yang-chio and even kidnap him without any warning. Originally, Yugu could have sensed Wu Qi's kidnapping. But, as his life was coming to an end, he dared not to waste even a little bit of his strength. He had been restraining his divine ability and magic power at all times, and was no different from an ordinary old man. No matter how powerful his divine ability was, it could only protect his own safety, and he could not take care of King Yangqiu. Hiding in the Shen, Wu Qi had calculated all the karmic entanglements clearly. He took a deep breath and felt that his Tao heart was smooth and bright, as if he had gained a deeper understanding of all kinds of karmic entanglements. He glanced at the turbulent sea in front of him, and without any hesitation, he immediately transformed into a gale and soared into the sky. Bringing with him a large tornado, he soared millions of miles into the sky, then turned into a gust of wind and sped toward Zhong province. King Yangqiu mistook me for King Zhangqiu's man. It's a great misunderstanding. Wu Qi did not have a good impression of King Zhangqiu, nor did he have a bad impression of him. After all, he and Lord Longyang were now in an ambiguous relationship, and Wu Qi had no idea if the two of them had developed some kind of relationship that was beyond friendship. But, Lord Longyang was Wu Qi's secret ally, and King Zhangqiu had more or less entangled with Wu Qi's interests. By letting King Yangqiu and King Zhangqiu fight each other and muddy the waters, Wu Qi was wondering if he could get more benefits from it. For the next 6 months, Wu Qi stayed in a secluded cultivation in East Sea County of Hai Province, using the excuse that he was injured by Madman Shui with the Mao and I Pearl as an excuse. During this time, he was either enjoying the beautiful scenery with Princess Zhanglu, meditating with Princess Zhanglu, personally training the soldiers in battle formations, seizing the natural energy in the spirit caves to improve his magic power and cultivation base, or helping Eugene mine the energy veins in Hai Province and collect an enormous amount of energy stones and immortal stones. All in all, he was very busy. Half a year of hard work had given Wu Qi a very fruitful result. First of all, his magic power and cultivation base had taken another step forward, and he was not far away from the peak-level Heaven Immortal realm, while all his divine abilities had been greatly improved. Secondly, the Luo clan had been moved to an E-county by Wu Qi and incorporated into the Underhand sect. With the excellent immortal cave abode in Mount Picking Star, the support of the immortal energy veins, and the endless supply of immortal stones, energy stones, and all kinds of spirit herbs, the cultivation base of the Luo clan and the demons Wu Qi had subdued had improved by leaps and bounds, which was very different from before. An Lu County and an E County were now under Wu Qi's control. All the officials were either impersonated by celestial fiend puppets, subdued by Wu Qi with violence and money, or slaughtered by the rebels of Myriad Immortal Alliance and replaced them with the elites of the scouting office. The Underhand sect had been developing in a low profile in Mount Picking Star. As long as they did not take the initiative to provoke others, who would know that there were so many cultivators cultivating in seclusion in Mount Picking Star? With Wu Qi's cover, the army of Zhong province never got close to an E county. Other places in Zhong province were filled with blood, but an E county and an Lu county, as their name suggested, had become a rare peaceful place in this chaotic time. The army of Hai province had secretly expanded to 50,000 soldiers. Wu Qi and Su Qin had used all kinds of means to control these people. It was nothing more than a stick and a carrot, and they had completely turned these 50,000 soldiers into their most loyal subordinates. Taking advantage of the Great Yu Army's attack on Myriad Immortal Alliance, Wu Qi's celestial fiend puppets of Hai Province had disguised themselves as peddlers of Hai Province, purchasing a large number of immortals and itinerant cultivators with a huge amount of money. They were going to carry out a large-scale blood sacrifice in the future to improve the overall strength of these 50,000 new soldiers. During the 6 months that Wu Qi had been in seclusion, nearly 1,000 of the provinces under De Yu's rule had turned into battlefields. As the saying went, when immortals fought, mortals suffered. This saying was well proven on Pangu continent. The generals of the human race and the gold immortals of Myriad Immortal Alliance could turn an area tens of thousands of miles around into dust with just a casual strike. Although they did not have the power of the ancient almighty experts, and did not have the ability to seriously injure Pangu continent, their attacks were enough to kill countless mortals. In particular, there were countless immortals from the Fiend League, Evil League, Ghost League, and Demon League in Myriad Immortal Alliance. These immortals were cruel and tyrannical. Taking advantage of the war, they slaughtered mortals and collected astronomical souls to refine all kinds of evil magical artifacts. For a time, the people in these provinces, which were the battlefields, were plunged into misery and suffering. The miserable scenes could not be described in words. When the 3,000 immortals from the Fiend League joined forces and killed all the people in a 7th-grade province under Zhong Province's rule while the punitive army was preoccupied, the souls and blood essence of hundreds of millions of mortals were extracted and refined into an extremely powerful fiend artifact, the Fiend Eye's soul-dispersing mirror. With the help of this terrible magical artifact, which concentrated the souls and blood essence of hundreds of millions of people, the war between Deyu Dynasty and Myriad Immortal Alliance reached a real climax. The human emperor, who presided over Liangzhu, flew into a rage. Imperial edicts were sent to many provinces under his rule like snowflakes. Qiqi assembled his troops in all the provinces under Deyu Dynasty's rule, and many princes, dukes, and other great nobles reorganized their private armies as well. Then, they launched an aggressive attack on all the itinerant cultivators on Panga continent. Whether they were allies of Myriad Immortal Alliance or not, wherever Deyu Dynasty pointed its knife at, all the cultivators were killed. The great Celestial Emperor of the Celestial Court had long issued a decree that the power of the Celestial Court would never interfere in the war on Panga continent. Taking advantage of the war, the disciples of the Buddhist League were happily recruiting believers from all over the world. Great Yu had no time to pay attention to these seemingly harmless cultivators of the Buddhist League, and just waved the butcher's knife at those unlucky fellows from the Tao League. For a moment, Panga continent was in a mess, and everyone felt precarious. As more and more itinerant cultivators were killed, Myriad Immortal Alliance, who was driven to desperation, launched a series of deadly attacks. Several elders of the Divine Hall personally summoned tens of thousands of huge stars from the void to bombard Panga continent, putting the officials of Deyu Dynasty in a sorry state. But, at the same time, they hated Myriad Immortal Alliance even more. Sitting in East Sea City, Wuqi listened quietly to the various intelligence reports sent back by his scouting office. Suddenly, he burst out laughing. The time has come. My father-in-law and the others can come to Panga continent now. Such a chaotic situation was a great opportunity for the elites of the Warring States period to show their talents. Chapter 630. Yes, the time had come. After spending a long time on Panga continent, apart from forming his innate chaotic spirit body, recruiting a group of subordinates, and owning a small territory, Wuqi had almost nothing else to offer. It was true that he had all the memories and experiences of Wu Wang and Lu Xiaobai, but their experiences were limited. One could not expect Wu Wang and Lu Xiaobai to have the ability and boldness to dominate the world. Panga continent was a vast place with countless outer heavenly realms, as well as countless almighty experts and almighty experts. How could Wu Qi alone make a firm foothold in such a wonderful world? In this world, a lone ranger was always the first to die. Up in the sky, Wu Qi had inherited his legacy, Reverend Gale, a mighty primordial immortal. But, he was all alone and did not have many subordinates. When the Eastern Green Emperor struck him with a thunderous strike and mobilized dozens of ancient gods to besiege him, no matter how mighty his cultivation base was, he was still killed in the end, and even his roof tiles were dug out. Therefore, one must have subordinates, a loyal confidant, and a power of his own. Apart from the civil and military officials of Great Yen, who else could Wu Qi rely on now? These people were all heroes and mighty figures. By bringing them to Panga continent, taking advantage of the time when Deyu Dynasty and Myriad Immortal Alliance were at war, Great Yen would be able to lay down its foundation on Panga continent, and secretly swallow a large piece of territory. In fact, not only Great Yen, but also Qin, Zhao, Wei, Chu, and Qi, as long as he had the Black Celestial Forbidden Curse, Wu Qi could pull them to his side. Why did the 6 dynasties have to fight and kill each other? Why could they not form a stable alliance of interests? Wu Qi speculated maliciously that it would be interesting if he could establish an Earth Federation on Panga continent. With this in mind, Wu Qi immediately came out of seclusion and submitted an official document to Bo Yunting, who was in command of the army. He told him that he had fully recovered, and was now returning to the army with 300 elite soldiers from East Sea County, ready to teach those rebels a lesson. Bo Yunting admired a general like Wu Qi, who was brave and good at fighting, and returned to the army as soon as he recovered from a serious injury. So, he immediately promoted Wu Qi by 1 grade, officially making Wu Qi a 3rd-grade general in the Yu army, and put him in charge of conquering the mountains southwest of Zhong province with 10,000 soldiers. Therefore, leading the army of 10,000 soldiers, Wu Qi bumped head-on into a group of fiend immortals who were besieging Green Ridge City in Myriad Mountains County southwest of Zhong province. Like Yuya City in Huangsha province, Qingling City was the most important producer of rare metals in Zhong province. The mountains that stretched for millions of miles in Wanshan province contained endless metal veins, including several kinds of rare spirit items that were indispensable for immortals to craft supreme-grade gold immortal artifacts. Therefore, Qingling City had become the most populous county in Zhong province. It was divided into 38 districts, each consisting of hundreds of towns, large and small, with a total population of more than 300 million. Of these 300 million people, 99% made their living from the ore veins, except for a very small number of officials and soldiers. Every day, the mountains of Wanshan province were filled with red light, and the flames in the huge stone furnaces that stood 1,000 feet tall burned fiercely. Countless metal ores were sent into the furnaces, and the red molten metal rushed rapidly through the pipes that were dozens of feet in diameter, eventually converging in a large man-made pool in front of the heart of Qingling City. The pool, which was built by tens of thousands of oracles from Zhong province's Directorate of Celestials with their divine abilities and magic, measured 100 miles in both width, and was about 10 miles deep. Red and scorching waves rolled in the pool day and night, while a huge amount of molten metal shot out of the huge pipes and poured into the pool, producing loud noises that sounded like the ringing of a bronze bell. A small flying ship made of jade, shaped like a leaf, hovered over the pool. A large number of oracles sprinkled a rain of light into the pool with various spirit talismans in their hands, while various spells absorbed the various metals in the waves and extracted the pure molten metal from the water. The molten metal, without any impurities, glowed in various colors and shot out of the pool like dragons, rushing into the huge magical storage artifacts hovering in the sky with deafening rumbles. Every large storage artifact could contain a small hill of metal ingots. A small part of these metal ingots would be sent to Zhong province to be used by the craftsmen working under the military court to forge all kinds of weapons, but over 90% of the rare metals would be sent to Liangzhou, where the craftsmen working under the military court would forge all kinds of weapons with amazing lethality. The amount of rare metals produced in Qingling City every day was enough to frighten any top-tier heaven immortal to death with a heart attack, enough to make any gold immortal drool, and enough to make any primordial immortal green with envy, wishing that he could bring his men and occupy the city. Every 10 days, the rare metals produced here were enough for a primordial immortal to gather the materials needed to forge a primordial immortal artifact. This was the reason why Pangu continent was so rich in natural resources, and it was one of the reasons why the immortals were always coveting it. Today, Qingling City had become a ghost town. Apart from its core city, which still had a thin layer of defensive formation to withstand the storm-like attacks, the other 37 cities and thousands of towns had been completely destroyed. The pipes that usually spewed out a vast amount of molten metal had cooled down, and the alloy liquid had condensed in them, completely blocking the costly pipes. In the large pond in front of Qingling City, the molten metal had already solidified into a large iron ingot that was as smooth as a mirror. The edges of this large lump of metal had turned greenish-black, and only a faint red glow could be seen flickering at its core. Faint wisps of hot air could be seen rising from it. All the flying ships hovering over the pool had been destroyed, and the corpses of the oracles who were responsible for refining various rare metals were strewn across the mountains. Some of them were gnawed to pieces, as if tens of thousands of rats had ravaged them. High up in the sky, there were hundreds of millions of shadowy figures. These shadowy figures had no faces, and their twisted and deformed limbs were stretched out. Like countless thin fishing lines, they rained down from the sky and bombarded the defensive formation above Qingling City. The people of the 37 cities and thousands of towns were gathered here. They had been refined into evil spirits of the Fiend League, and now they were the vanguard of the attack on Qingling City. The minds of all the evil spirits had been wiped out, leaving only the most instinctive greed and ferocity. Waving their deformed limbs, they attacked the formation with all their might. Each of their attacks only had the force of 1,000 kilograms, but when hundreds of millions of evil spirits attacked at the same time, the defensive formation of Qingling City burst into countless tiny light spots, shaking the surrounding mountain ridges, and causing the people who were lucky enough to survive in the city to scream in fear. More than 30 grotesquely shaped Fiend League immortals hovered in the sky, letting out shrill cries complacently. 36 long banners, each tens of feet tall, hovered in the sky, spraying out millions upon millions of wisps of dark smoke, each of which was connected to an evil spirit of the Fiend League. These Fiend League immortals gently waved the banners in their hands. Every time they did so, the evil spirits would change their positions in the void, communicating with the murderous aura that filled the void and bombarding Qingling City. When Wu Qi came to Qingling City on a flying ship with 10,000 soldiers, he happened to see the defensive formation over the city let out a shrill wail. Dozens of oracles, who were struggling to support the formation, fell to the ground with blood spraying out of their bodies, while the limbs of hundreds of millions of evil spirits, which were twisted by billions of them, immediately shot down into the ground like tiny threads, piercing into the bodies of these oracles. In just a blink of an eye, 3 moon oracles and more than 40 star oracles were sucked dry by the evil spirits, howling miserably. Hundreds of millions of evil spirits let out shrill cries as they converged into a dense stream of dark light and plunged into Qingling City. At the prow of the flying ship, Wu Qi let out a shrill cry. With a wave of his hand, the 100 moon oracles and 1,000 star oracles who came with the army raised their hands at the same time and began to chant the sacrificial ballad of the Directorate of Celestials. A vast amount of energy rushed out of these oracles and condensed into a faintly discernible fiend god, who had 3 heads, 12 faces, and 36 arms, spitting flames from his mouth, and a long serpent coiled around his body. The fiend god, who stood 10,000 feet tall, waved his arms and intertwined into 18 bizarre beads, which formed a double wheel in front of him, 6 on the inside and 12 on the outside. Then, it shot down amidst a great plume of green flame and hit the hundreds of millions of evil spirits that were about to rush into Qingling City. Countless wails rang out as nearly half of the evil spirits, who were caught off guard, were wiped out in an instant. The fiend god summoned by the oracles was the projection of a fiend god from the Soul Devourer clan, who was famous for devouring evil spirits in the outer heavenly realms. When these evil spirits came together, they possessed a very strong power, but individually, they were still extremely fragile. Therefore, they had achieved great success with just one strike. The 30-odd fiend immortals who controlled these evil spirits flew into a rage. With a wave of the banners in their hands, the hundreds of millions of evil spirits immediately let out shrill cries and flew toward Wu Qi and his companions, leaving behind streams of light. Wu Qi waved his hand again. The deck in front of the flying ship opened up, from which came dozens of god-stunning crossbows made by Deyu himself. Muffled booms rang out as 108 crossbows, each as thick as a human head and tens of feet long, shot whistling through the air toward the fiend immortals with a blinding light. Miserable shrieks rang out as more than half of the fiend immortals were killed on the spot. Only 3 of them with the strongest cultivation base rolled up the 18 banners, transformed into black smoke, and fled into the sky. The remaining evil spirits swooped in, but Wu Qi was careless. He accidentally rushed out of the flying ship and was swept into the torrent of evil spirits. Nearly 100 million evil spirits rushed into Wu Qi's spiritual ocean and invaded his body. Wu Qi's body stiffened, and his eyes turned cloudy. He howled and rolled violently with his arms around his head. Then, his body twitched violently, and he fell from the sky while foaming at the mouth. The oracles who accompanied him cried out in alarm and rushed toward Wu Qi. Chapter 631. In Zhong Province, the military minister of Hai Province, Tan Lang, was cursed by a fiend immortal, and his soul was trapped by an evil spirit while leading an army to wipe out the rebels of Myriad Immortal Alliance. No medicine could cure him, so he could only receive a false title and some gold, silver, and jewelry, before being sent back to the East Sea City in East Sea County to recuperate. Wu Qi's injury was very strange, so strange that even the Sun Oracle serving Bo Yunting could do nothing about it. His soul and the evil spirit were in a mess. If the soul of an ordinary man was the size of a water tank, Wu Qi's soul was so dim that it was only the size of a fist. The flame of his soul was suppressed by the evil spirit, and he was in danger of dying at any time. The Directorate of Celestials had all kinds of mystic techniques to cure souls, but when faced with the strange situation of Wu Qi's soul and evil spirit, the Sun Oracles could only shake their heads helplessly. None of them dared to save Wu Qi, lest they accidentally shatter Wu Qi's severely wounded soul. If that happened, there would be no hope for him. On the other hand, those supreme oracles, whose cultivation bases were many times stronger than the Sun Oracles, and who definitely had the ability to save Wu Qi. Firstly, Bo Yunting did not have the face to ask for help from supreme oracles. Secondly, as a mere third-grade Golden Seal General and the military minister of a ninth-grade province, how could he have the face to ask for help from supreme oracles? Therefore, Wu Qi had no choice but to return to the East Sea City with his strange injury and the huge amount of gold, silver, and jewelry Bo Yunting had given him. After leaving a celestial fiend puppet in the East Sea City to play dead, Wu Qi, who was instantly full of vigor, and Princess Xianglu, changed their appearances and went straight to the Puyo heavenly realm using a super long-distance teleportation formation in a third-grade province under Zhong Province's rule. Over 100 million evil spirits that rushed into Wu Qi's spiritual ocean had been tightly confined by the cage Wu Qi had conjured using the divine flame of order, and was slowly refining and absorbing them. These evil spirits were transformed from the souls of mortals. Each evil spirit had soul power equivalent to more than 10 times that of an ordinary mortal's soul. If he could absorb all of these evil spirits, Wu Qi's divine soul would grow to an unimaginable realm. A huge divine soul represented a powerful divine sense, which represented a better comprehension and comprehension ability of the heavenly Tao. The laws of the heavenly Tao were like complex mathematical problems. A cultivator's divine soul was like a calculator, and a cultivator's cultivation method was like a computing program. Wu Qi already had an extremely advanced calculation program, such as the Song of Gale, the Dark-Een Water Scripture, and the Inferno Hell Fiend Scripture, all of which were top-notch techniques that pointed directly to the heavenly Tao. If he could absorb all of these hundreds of millions of evil spirits, his divine soul would be greatly strengthened, and his understanding of the heavenly Tao would definitely increase by leaps and bounds. Amidst the void, the tunnel formed by the seven-colored light went straight to a place far away. Wu Qi and Princess Xianglu were sitting cross-legged on the silver lotus, their palms clasped together. The chaotic energy in Wu Qi's body was connected with the innate divine energy in Princess Zhongli's body, constantly communicating and transforming with each other. A five-colored divine ray enveloped both of them, driving the silver lotus throne to keep teleporting forward. Every time the five-colored divine ray shone brightly, Wu Qi and Princess Xianglu would bring the silver lotus throne forward for a great distance. A distance that would take an ordinary immortal days to travel with the Grand Universal Teleportation Formation was now covered in a single teleportation. Wu Qi's chaotic energy was injected into Princess Zhongli's body, fusing with Princess Zhongli's innate divine energy and slowly turning into five-colored divine rays. Gradually, the power in Princess Zhongli's body was covered with a layer of chaotic energy, and her power became more and more condensed, mysterious and unfathomable. An ancient aura that felt like it came from the beginning of the world slowly spread out from Princess Zhongli's body, and even Princess Zhongli's beautiful face was filled with a sense of holiness and majesty. At the same time, the five-colored divine rays were injected into Wu Qi's body, fusing with Wu Qi's chaotic energy. Each of the five-colored divine rays contained the ancient heavenly God's understanding of the great Tao of heaven and earth. When the world was first created, the great Tao of heaven and earth was raw, pure, and exposed before the innate living beings. Therefore, these innate living beings were born with incredible power. Although Princess Xianglu, who inherited the legacy of the ancient heavenly gods, had yet to understand these great Tao laws, her five-colored divine rays contained these mysterious great Tao laws. Princess Xianglu had to study these great Tao laws through the five-colored divine rays. It was like looking at the moon in a mirror, she had to try her best to guess the mysteries within. But Wu Qi, with his chaotic energy, directly devoured these five-colored divine rays, just like a mortal eating or drinking. All the nutrients were directly absorbed by his body. Thus, it was much easier for Wu Qi to understand the great Tao laws contained in the five-colored divine rays than Princess Xianglu. Recorded in the five-colored divine rays were the Tao of nature, including wind, thunder, rain, snow, earth, water, fire, wind, the change of seasons, earthquakes, volcanoes, and many other marvelous principles. Gradually, Wu Qi digested the five-colored divine rays that Princess Xianglu had sent to him. Vaguely, he had merged with the surrounding void. Wu Qi's aura had become even more blurry, as if he would completely vanish in the void at any time and truly merge with the universe. Behind Princess Xianglu, a hazy sphere of aura gradually emerged. This sphere of aura didn't seem to have any color, yet it seemed to contain all the colors in the world. It didn't seem to have any shape, yet it seemed to contain all the shapes in the world, as if everything was born in it, yet it also seemed to be able to devour and destroy everything in the world. The profoundness of the chaotic energy was clearly seen in the five-colored divine rays released by Princess Xianglu. The divine rays already possessed a vast range of divine abilities, but now, they looked even more magical. Wu Qi's entire body was enveloped by a few inches thick layer of chaotic energy. Within the faintly discernible layer of chaotic energy, one could vaguely see countless magical lights and shadows flashing. There were volcanic eruptions, roaring tsunamis, raging gales, snowstorms, and all kinds of natural phenomena that existed between the heaven and the earth were vaguely emerging in the light. It was as if his body had become a miniature world, filled with infinite mysteries. The silver lotus throne was absorbing the magical energy from Wu Qi and Princess Xianglu. Gradually, the silver lotus throne turned colorful, and a subtle innate energy could be sensed from it. The origin of this silver lotus throne was extremely powerful, and now, after being contaminated by the energy of Wu Qi and Princess Xianglu, it was gradually transforming into a real innate spirit treasure. From time to time, Wu Qi and Princess Xianglu would speak some mantras, explaining their understanding of the Tao of heaven and earth. The silver lotus thrones beneath them waved their petals happily, cheering like living creatures. As the saying goes, the mantras of the Buddhist League could make a stubborn rock nod its head. While Wu Qi and Princess Xianglu were explaining the Tao of heaven and earth, the silver lotus throne had gained endless benefits. At the core of the silver lotus throne, a wisp of innate spirit consciousness had gradually taken shape, and was gradually transforming into a human body. Because it had been nourished by Princess Xiangli's aura day and night, this wisp of innate spirit consciousness had instinctively used Princess Xiangli's appearance as a template, and made adjustments to its own appearance. Days passed, and the clothes of Wu Qi and Princess Xianglu, who had reached the peak of their cultivation, suddenly vanished into thin air, and the two of them were tightly joined together. Wu Qi was lying on the silver lotus throne, his hands locked into a mudra and placed on his chest. Princess Xianglu was sitting on top of Wu Qi, her face expressionless, her hands locked into a mudra and placed on her dantian. The chaotic energy and innate divine energy converged and exchanged between their bodies, and after 49 days, their bodies suddenly trembled, and a blinding light burst out from the spot where their bodies were joined. Then, their essence energy blasted out and merged into one, merging with the chaotic energy and innate divine energy, turning into two immeasurably small objects that weighed billions of tons, emitting a terrifyingly high temperature, and were sent back into their bodies. Wu Qi suddenly realized that this was the true foundation of his and Princess Xiangli's great Tao, and all the future achievements of him and Princess Xiangli lay in it. He pressed the mudra heavily on Princess Xiangli's chest, while the mudra formed by Princess Xiangli was pressed firmly on the spot between Wu Qi's eyebrows. For a moment, their spirit and flesh had become one, and their aura had transformed into a ball of golden light, with purple mist rising from it and a Jin Dan halo surrounding them. Endless heavenly secrets flowed down from the top of their heads, and the objects inside their bodies, which had no volume but were extremely heavy and hot, exploded with a boom, turning into two small worlds inside their bodies. When a cultivator cultivated to the realm of heaven immortal, he or she would be able to create his or her own interstitial space. Those heaven immortals who had profound cultivation base and had comprehended the great Tao of heaven and earth would create their own interstitial space, either turning it into a cave abode for secluded cultivation, or a Taoist temple for recruiting disciples. Every single heaven immortal who had a powerful backer and a brilliant cultivation technique had created their own interstitial seed. But, the divine ability of creating interstitial space was extremely mysterious. If an ordinary heaven immortal did not inherit it, he or she might not be able to comprehend it even if they cultivated to the peak of heaven immortal realm. Among the 10,000 heaven immortals in outer heavenly realms, it would be considered good if one could create his or her own interstitial space. A heaven immortal's interstitial space had to be stabilized by the natural earth veins and energy veins, and could not be carried around unless there was an extraordinary treasure to suppress it. But when one reached the realm of gold immortal, he or she could create an interstitial space inside his or her body and turn it into a world of its own. The Buddhist kingdom in the palm of eminent Buddhas of the Buddhist League and the heavenly realms created by the almighty experts of the Tao League were all concrete worlds derived from such interstitial spaces. At this moment, as Wu Qi and Princess Xianglu cultivated together with their spirit and flesh, they had inadvertently created their own interstitial space inside their bodies and turned it into a small world. Although they did not have the overall strength of a gold immortal, because of the chaotic energy and innate divine energy, they had reached the same realm as a gold immortal. The interstitial world inside Wu Qi was a primordial void. It looked very small, but it was actually very vast. At his will, all kinds of wind, rain, thunder, lightning, earth, water, fire, wind, and all kinds of wonders could be seen in it. It was full of endless changes. But, the interstitial world inside Princess Xianglu was a real green mountain and beautiful water. It was only about a foot in diameter, but it was very small. There were a small mountain, a small pool of water, a few clouds flying across it, and a gentle breeze blowing. It already had the appearance of a world of its own. Wu Qi and Princess Xianglu opened their eyes at the same time. They looked at each other and smiled. Suddenly, a terrible suction burst out from the small world inside them, quickly absorbing the endless natural energy in the surrounding void. Wild with joy, Wu Qi and Princess Xianglu immediately used the power of the small world to convert the natural energy into their own energy. In an instant, the silver lotus throne was enveloped by an enormous amount of natural energy, and with a flash, it disappeared without a trace. 2 months later, Wu Qi and Princess Xianglu returned to Yuhua Heavenly Realm. Chapter 632. Yuhua Heavenly Realm still looked the same. The magnificent immortal monarch's mansion stood right next to the square where the teleportation formation was located. The bright sunlight shone on the mansion, which was decorated with carved balustrades and jade bricks, jade walls, and golden tiles. It was a magnificent sight that none of the buildings in the Yu dynasty could compare with. The tense atmosphere on Panga continent did not affect Yuhua Heavenly Realm at all. Immortals and itinerant cultivators were still strolling lazily in the streets. Some itinerant cultivators with weaker cultivation bases sat listlessly on the edge of the square, with a cloth spread out in front of them as a stall, where they were selling some worthless items. There were also a few itinerant immortals with the cultivation base of heaven immortals walking back and forth among the stalls of these peddlers with serious faces, hoping to stumble upon some rare natural treasures that were as cheap as cabbages. Holding Princess Xiangli's hand, Wu Qi nodded with mixed emotions as he looked at the immortals and itinerant cultivators in the distance. The entire Pangu continent gave off an oppressive feeling, extremely oppressive. In the face of the terrible pressure of Great Yu dynasty, those immortals were living like rabbits under the butcher's knife, always in a precarious situation. Even someone as arrogant as Reverend Yao Yu only dared to establish his own sect in Hai Province, a remote place like Zhong Province. Why didn't he dare to build an immortal market in a vital place like Zhong Province? But, when they arrived in outer heavenly realms, whether they were immortals or itinerant cultivators who had yet to register themselves as immortals, they all exuded a sense of laziness and idleness, which was completely different from their peers on Pangu continent. If the immortals and cultivators on Pangu continent were wild wolves desperately seeking survival, then these immortals in outer heavenly realms were tamed lapdogs. They did not have the aggressive aura of their peers on Pangu continent. Holding Princess Xiangli's hand, the two of them walked side by side towards the teleportation formation that led to outer heavenly realms. Before going to meet Yan Dan and the others, Wu Qi wanted to settle a score with Patriarch Yuan Hua. In the past, Patriarch Yuanhua had sent Daoist Min and Daoist Qi to ambush Wu Qi with a primordial gold talisman, nearly killing Wu Qi in the process. In the end, he even forced Princess Xianglu to marry his grandson. How could he let go of such a grudge? Patriarch Yuanhua, and even the entire Yuanhua sect, no longer needed to exist. It would only take a short while to travel from Yuhua Heavenly Realm to Puyo Heavenly Realm, where Yuanhua sect was located, using a teleportation formation. It would not delay Wu Qi. On the way, he could also visit Minor Heavenly Circle Realm and Myriad Immortals Planet. Since Yuanhua sect had attacked Wu Qi, Patriarch Jiang Yun might have offered the entire Myriad Immortals Planet to Yuanhua sect. Wu Qi wondered what kind of situation the planet was in now. But, no matter what Yuanhua sect had done to Myriad Immortals Planet, even if all the resources on the planet had been looted by Yuanhua sect, Wu Qi would make them spit everything out. Now, Wu Qi was confident enough to do that. Even if it was just a lower-grade energy stone, they would have to spit it out obediently to Wu Qi. At the thought of Patriarch Yuanhua sending someone to kill him, Wu Qi's heart was immediately filled with a strong killing intent. His eyebrows arched up like two sharp swords piercing his temples, and even Princess Xianglu could sense the towering killing intent. Princess Xianglu gave Wu Qi a gentle smile and said, "Are you thinking of Patriarch Yuanhua? Since that unruly Daoist dared to threaten me, I'll have to give him a good explanation." Princess Xianglu pursed her lips into a faint smile. Her eyes flickered like stars as she turned to Wu Qi and said, "I'll have to torture his immortal soul and find out where his descendants are. As for his daughters and granddaughters, we can just send them to Great Yan's musical house as military prostitutes. As for his sons and grandsons." After a brief moment of pondering, Princess Xianglu snorted coldly and said, "Great Yan's imperial palace on Myriad Immortals Planet still needs some eunuchs to clean the toilets. Castrate them and send them to Myriad Immortals Planet to guard the palace." Wu Qi shuddered. He gave Princess Xianglu a look and did not say a word. The education Princess Xianglu received since childhood was very different from his. Wu Qi had no reason to demand Princess Xianglu with his own moral values. Besides, the way Princess Xianglu dealt with Patriarch Yuanhua's clan was very satisfying to Wu Qi. Therefore, he would do as Princess Xianglu told him. Nodding slowly, Wu Qi was about to say yes when Princess Xianglu suddenly clapped her hands and said with a smile, "I can see that the unruly Taoist Yuanhua is quite handsome, and he must have been a gigolo when he was young. That means, there might be some good-looking granddaughters among his granddaughters. Just pick 8 or 10 of them from them. I need a few serving maids. Darling, you might as well take them as your concubines." Wu Qi was struck dumb, but Princess Xianglu smiled and said, "After all, they are the descendants of that unruly Taoist Yuanhua. If you are having fun, you can keep them in the mansion for a few more days. When you are tired of them, and they give birth to children, I'll bring them up and sell them to a brothel. It will be cheap, and I can earn back some of the money I need to feed them." Wu Qi's face turned stiff. He laughed dryly and said, "Zi Xian, you really have some tricks up your sleeve." Princess Xianglu narrowed her eyes and smiled complacently. She stuck out her chest proudly and raised her delicate chin as she said, "Of course. Since I was young, Zi Xian has been taught a lesson by the nannies in the palace. So, I do have some tricks up my sleeve to manage my family." Both of them were laughing as they walked. Just as they were about to reach the teleportation formation that led to Yuhua Heavenly Realm, 2 spears suddenly appeared in front of Wu Qi, their sharp tips pointing at Wu Qi's nose. "Take down these 2 spies." A loud cry rang out. Wu Qi was taken aback. Instinctively, he reached out his hand and shielded Princess Xianglu behind him, then fixed his eyes on the front. The 2 men with the spears were 2 valiant warriors clad in soft leather armors. Judging from the faint purple mist rising from their bodies, it was obvious that they were practicing the body tempering technique taught by Dayu's army. But, their cultivation base was not very strong, only equivalent to a nascent soul cultivator. On Pangu continent, soldiers with this level of cultivation base would be assigned to do odd jobs in the army, helping the soldiers wash their socks and underwear. But, it was a different story in outer heavenly realms. Soldiers with the overall strength equivalent to nascent soul cultivators were the main force in the army, and if they had the overall strength equivalent to a heaven immortal, they would be treated as a mighty general. After all, outer heavenly realms were not Pangu continent, where the mysterious purple mist used by human warriors for their cultivation was extremely rare. No matter how good one's aptitude was, there was no way he could improve his overall strength too quickly. Two soldiers stood in front of Wu Qi and Princess Xianglu, while heavily armed warriors were slowly approaching from both sides and behind. The man who accused Wu Qi and Princess Xianglu of being spies was a lieutenant clad in a bronze armor, with a sword hanging at his waist and a bronze medallion hanging on his belt. Judging from the mark on the medallion, he was a 9th-grade lieutenant, the lowest rank, who could command a squad of 30 to 50 soldiers at most. Wu Qi snorted coldly and snapped, "Spies? What kind of spies are we?" They were in Yuhua Heavenly Realm, the territory of Heavenly Lord Sanyu. Although the Deyu dynasty also had an administrative base here, which was guarded by Yuzong, Marquis Jian, with an army, the garrison of Deyu dynasty in Yuhua Heavenly Realm was more of a symbolic significance. Outer Heavenly Realms had always been the traditional territory of the Celestial Court. In Yuhua Heavenly Realm, Heavenly Lord Sanyu was the real local tyrant. Since when could the human soldiers arrest people at his doorstep? Wu Qi looked at the little captain with a puzzled expression. The captain kept glancing at Princess Xiangli's beautiful face with a pair of triangular eyes, while saliva seemed to be dripping from the corner of his mouth. Upon hearing Wu Qi's words, the lieutenant sneered and said, "What spies? You are the spies of Myriad Immortal Alliance. By the decree of the human emperor, we have the right to arrest any spies who try to spy on the military situation of Deyu dynasty." The lieutenant reached out to grab Wu Qi's collar and said with a cold grin, "Daoist, you better be obedient and don't move recklessly, lest you bring disaster to yourself." Letting the lieutenant grab his collar, Wu Qi turned to Princess Xianglu and said with a smile, "It seems you are the one who caused the trouble, Zi Xian." Princess Xianglu frowned. Suddenly, her pretty face was covered with a faint glow, within which, one could vaguely see lightning flashing and thunder rumbling. It was a sign that could only be seen when an immortal had just broken through a bottleneck and stepped into a new realm, and was still unable to control the immortal energy in his body well, thus causing a conflict between his existence and the great Tao of heaven and earth. It would never happen to an immortal who was not a gold immortal or above. Heaven immortals only had a superficial understanding of the great Tao of heaven and earth, and heaven immortals only studied how to use the great Tao of heaven and earth. Gold immortals, on the other hand, had already stepped into a new realm, where they began to study how to distort and change the great Tao of heaven and earth. Therefore, only the immortal energy of gold immortals would conflict with the great Tao of heaven and earth, and thus cause such a sign. The appearance of such a sign on Princess Xiangli's face proved that she had stepped into the realm of gold immortal. As a frog at the bottom of a well in outer heavenly realms, the captain never knew that there were such strange things among the immortals. He gave Princess Xianglu, whose face had become hazy, a surprised look, and said with a giggle, "Someone, tie this female cultivator up and send her to Master Marquis's mansion. Let Master Marquis interrogate her personally and find out what conspiracy they have against Great Yu. Let Yuzong interrogate Princess Xianglu personally." Wu Qi understood what was going on. He sneered and said, "Did Yuzong ask you to abduct a civilian girl?" He looked over his shoulder at the tightly shut door of the immortal mansion, where a few immortal officials were hovering in midair, pointing and whispering to each other. But, it was obvious that these immortal officials had no intention of interfering. They were just frowning and murmuring something. It suddenly dawned on Wu Qi that the edict of the great celestial emperor of the celestial court must have spread across the outer heavenly realms. Now that the lieutenant had labeled him and Princess Xianglu as spies of Myriad Immortal Alliance, even Heavenly Lord Sanyu would not dare to violate the edict of the great celestial emperor. Sighing softly, Wu Qi shook his head and said, "Since when did Yuzong become so despicable? How could he even abduct a civilian girl?" The lieutenant flew into a rage. He threw a slap at Wu Qi and roared, "How presumptuous! How can the title of Marquis Jian be used by a bastard like you?" Before Wu Qi could do anything, Princess Xianglu had already kicked the lieutenant 3 inches below his navel. A thunderbolt flashed whistling through the air, and the lieutenant howled miserably as he flew backward, clutching his crotch. Suddenly, a plume of dark smoke rose from the middle of his thigh below his abdomen, and a scorched smell of grilled meat came wafting out. Princess Xianglu had replaced her hand with her leg, delivering a powerful palm thunder to the lower part of the captain's body. The surrounding soldiers of Deyu dynasty were shocked. One after another, they drew their weapons and surrounded Wu Qi and Princess Xianglu. Chapter 633. Outside Yuhua Immortal City, in Deyu army camp, in a deep and dim bedchamber, Yuzong was sprinting with all his might on a bed carved out of a boulder and covered with countless brocades and furs. The bed was so soft and smooth that it made one drowsy. On this huge bed that was several tens of feet in length and width, there were over 30 beautiful women lying in a disorderly manner. There were girls from the human race, the feather men, the longbow people, and even the rare mermen and some other strange races, such as the one-legged, three-eyed, two-faced, and hollow. Almost all the races that existed on Panga continent could be found on this bed, as long as they were beautiful and had a curvaceous body. Among them, 7 or 8 female cultivators with strong cultivation bases were lying on the bed with tears in their eyes. Their bodies were a mess, and some unknown liquid was smeared all over their bodies and faces. Cold gleams could be vaguely seen flashing on their vital acupoints. Obviously, they had been captured by force, and their magic power was sealed by the immortal detaining spike. One of the female immortals, whose overall strength had reached the realm of heaven immortal, had 3 talismans flashing with a dark gleam stuck on her body, firmly imprisoning her immortal soul in her spiritual ocean. Yuzong sprinted with all his might, panting like an ox. Suddenly, his body twitched, and sweat broke out from his body. He panted a few times, then slowly got up from the convulsing girl, then lay down on the body of another girl next to him. A painful moan rang out, and Yuzong continued to sprint with all his might. Ever since Princess Xianglu and Lao Ai killed Yuzong's 3 precious sons on Myriad Immortals planet, and Wu Qi killed his favorite eldest son, Yuhuan, in Yuhua Immortal City, Yuzong's bloodline was completely cut off. Flying into a rage out of humiliation, Yuzong had been ordering his generals and soldiers to help him abduct girls and bring them back to the camp, while he worked hard at the fields, hoping to have a few more children. According to the unspoken rules of Deyu dynasty, if he did not have any children, he would never be promoted in this life, and his title of nobility might even be taken away because of this. He was still hoping to leave Yuhua Heavenly Realm and return to Panga continent to live a carefree life. Even being the prefecture overseer of a 9th-grade province on Panga continent was more comfortable than being the protector of the land in a place like Yuhua Heavenly Realm. This damned place. Immortals and itinerant cultivators everywhere. Panting, Yu Miao ravaged the girl beneath him, gritting his teeth and cursing the parents of Yu Miao, the left minister of Zhong province. When Wu Qi kidnapped Yu Hehuan, Yu Miao had spent all his wealth to hire Yu Miao to kill Wu Qi. Yu Miao took the money and told Yu Miao that the man who killed his son was indeed killed by him. But, he could not produce any evidence to prove that Wu Qi was killed by him. Yu Miao always felt that he had spent the money in vain. Without seeing Wu Qi's head, Yuzong did not believe that Wu Qi was really killed, and he felt that the murderer of his son must still be roaming around somewhere. But, Yu Mu was the grand elder of Yu clan in Zhong province, and Yuzong was just a member of the collateral branch of Yu clan in Zhong province. How could he have the courage to reason with Yuzong? Left with no other choice, he could only curse Yu Mu's parents on his bed, and pretend that the girl beneath him was Yu Mu's mother to exact his revenge. Just as he was feeling complacent, a healthy girl clad in a soft armor strode into the bedchamber and cried out, "Marquis Jian, we've found a beautiful girl. She is extremely beautiful, and I'm sure she will suit Marquis Jian's taste. She has just come out of the teleportation formation leading to Panga continent, and she should be an itinerant cultivator who has fled from Panga continent. The children have already entangled them, but the children can't deal with them." Yuzong's movements stopped abruptly, and he asked with a deep smile, "Them?" "That girl is accompanied by a man dressed like a Taoist," the girl said in a deep voice. "He should be her partner." Laughing out loud, Yumu rolled to his feet, grabbed a cloak, and wrapped it around his body. Wonderful. I like those female cultivators who have Taoist companions the most, he said. Hee, just like these few. Killing their husbands and seizing their wives, how wonderful is that? Laughing wildly, Yuzong's figure flickered and he rushed out of the bedchamber. Immediately after that, the entire military camp was thrown into chaos. A large number of soldiers lined up in battle formations, waved banners, and followed Yuzong to Yuhua Immortal City. In Yuhua Immortal City, a group of about 20 soldiers had been beaten up by Princess Xianglu, leaving them crawling on the ground. Wu Qi folded his arms before his chest and watched the scene with a smile on his face. Princess Xianglu rolled up her sleeves and threw punches at the soldiers like raindrops. Her fingers were soft and tender, but each of her punches carried a force that could split mountains. The soldiers' bones and tendons were broken, and even their internal organs were injured by the tremendous force. Princess Xianglu cultivated the primordial Tao of divinity. As the ancient gods had mastered all kinds of natural phenomena, their divine bodies were very strong, very different from the immortals of today. Princess Xianglu did not deliberately temper her fleshly body, but as her innate divine energy grew stronger and her cultivation base improved, the force of nature naturally fused with her body, which made her fleshly body stronger. Although she looked like a little girl in her teens, with her extraordinary strength, perhaps even Wu Qi could not teach her as easily as she did. In order to cultivate the true body of heaven and earth scripture, Wu Qi had to work hard to draw the energy into his body and temper his fleshly body with the mysterious purple energy. But, Princess Xianglu did not have to consider this part of her cultivation base at all, and her fleshly body had been improved just like that. With Princess Xiangli's cultivation base, which was very close to that of a gold immortal, these soldiers only possessed the overall strength of ordinary nascent soul cultivators. Although their fleshly bodies were strong, they were only as strong as a lump of pig iron. Therefore, with a series of punches and kicks, they were in a horrible state. Several of their necks were broken, and it seemed that they could no longer breathe. They could only inhale and exhale. Many immortal officials in the immortal abode were looking at them with smiles on their faces, and even a few low-ranking immortal officials in green robes and hats were applauding and cheering. The Celestial Court forbade all immortal officials from participating in the battle between Deyu and Myriad Immortal Alliance. Therefore, Yuzong had taken this opportunity to do whatever he wanted in Yuhua Immortal City. Over the past 2 years, he had cheated countless female cultivators and immortals. Naturally, those immortal officials were very happy to see his soldiers being beaten up by a beautiful and delicate female cultivator. Just when a few soldiers could not stand the beating any longer and dropped to their knees, kowtowing and begging Princess Xianglu to let them go, a dull clatter of hooves rang out as Yuzong rushed into Yuhua Immortal City with 3,000 soldiers. At Yuzong's order, 3,000 soldiers surrounded the square, while he went straight to Princess Xianglu with a dozen of his deputies. Wu Qi gave Yuzong a glance and found that his cultivation base was still the same as before. Over the past few years, Yuzong had been living like a dog, and his cultivation base had not improved at all. A man like Yuzong was no longer worthy of Wu Qi's attention. He yawned lazily and did not even bother to say a word. Let Princess Xianglu do whatever she wants. With Princess Xiangli's cultivation base now close to that of a gold immortal, even if Yuzong brought all the human army garrisoned in Yuhua Heavenly Realm here, they would not be able to withstand a single strike from Princess Xianglu, not to mention the few men he brought with him. The gap between their cultivation bases and overall strength was too huge, and the number of people could not make up for it. Grinning coldly, Wu Qi stretched out his hand and rubbed his face, slightly changing his facial features. Now that he was wearing a Taoist robe and using the means of an immortal, he naturally could not meet people with the face he used on Pangu continent. Therefore, he made up a new face. In any case, he was acting in a secretive manner, and there were many things that he could not tell others. As a result, his face was getting thicker and thicker, and he was gradually losing his original appearance. While Wu Qi was rubbing his face, Yuzong just gave him a cold glance. Yuzong could not help but sneer when he saw Wu Qi standing aside as if nothing had happened. Another gutless itinerant cultivator who needs my partner to fight for me when dealing with a few soldiers. I'll just drive this itinerant cultivator away. Yuzong did not even have the mood to kill him. On the other hand, Princess Xianglu was indeed a beautiful woman. Her face, her figure, her noble temperament, and her ancient and mysterious charm had made Yuzong's heart burn, and he wished he could do something to Princess Xianglu right there and then. Unlike ordinary female cultivators and immortals, Princess Xianglu was born in the depths of the imperial palace. She had been living in luxury since she was a child, and she had her own power. No one in the entire Great Yan dynasty dared to offend her. As a result, her temperament was completely different from those female cultivators and immortals. The noble, lofty, sacred, and inviolable aura naturally exuded from her bones. Yuzong had never seen someone as wonderful as her. Impatient, Yuzong reached out to grab Princess Zhongli's arm and burst into laughter. "Come back with me, my good girl. I'll let you enjoy the luxurious clothes and all the benefits. Hee, you can have anything you want if you follow me." Princess Xianglu was having a good time beating the few soldiers. Although the 3,000 soldiers brought by Yuzong had surrounded the square, she did not take them seriously. But, when Yuzong dared to reach out to grab her, Princess Xianglu flew into a rage and gave him a backhand slap. Yuzong did not think much of it. The delicate look of Princess Xianglu was not a deterrent to him at all. Besides, those who cultivated the primordial Tao of divinity were different from ordinary cultivators. Ordinary people could not tell how profound Princess Zhongli's cultivation base was. When he saw Princess Zhongli's slap coming at him, Yuzong smiled and put his face forward, intentionally letting Princess Zhonglu slap him, and at the same time, feel the smoothness and warmth of the beauty's palm. A loud boom rang out as Yuzong's head was smashed and exploded like a rotten watermelon. He did not have the smoothness and warmth of the beauty's palm, but he did have a palm that was thousands of times harder than a diamond, and had the power to shatter the stars. After killing Yuzong with the palm, a crimson flame shot out of Princess Zhongli's palm and engulfed Yuzong's entire body. A faintly discernible scream rang out as both his soul and fleshly body were burned to ashes by the flame. The soldiers brought by Yuzong shrieked with fear, drew their weapons, and charged forward at the same time. Princess Xianglu gave a cold snort as purple thunderbolts flashed around her body, shooting out bolts the size of baskets like raindrops and knocking the 3,000 soldiers off their feet. In the time it took for an ordinary person to take a sip of water, the 3,000 soldiers, whose cultivation base was only at the nascent soul realm, and whose strongest deputy was only at the level of a lower-tier heaven immortal, were wiped out. The square was quiet, and even the immortal officials of the immortal abode had carefully retracted their heads, not daring to look in their direction. Princess Xianglu and Wu Qi exchanged a glance and smiled. Ignoring the others, they stepped into the teleportation formation. A quarter of an hour later, they arrived at Pyuyo Heavenly Realm. Chapter 634. After walking out of the teleportation formation that connected Pyuyo Heavenly Realm to Yuhua Heavenly Realm, Wu Qi and Princess Xianglu flew up into the sky and flew in the direction of Green Cliff Planet. With their current cultivation base, Wu Qi and Princess Xianglu could travel across the void by teleporting, leaving a small galaxy behind them with just a blink of their bodies. In less than one day, a large planet came into their sight. The Green Cliff Planet was right before their eyes. Today's Green Cliff Planet was very different from a few years ago. Yuanhua sect was flourishing, with Patriarch Yuanhua's cultivation base growing deeper and deeper. Furthermore, he had obtained an upper-grade immortal item that was nearly invincible in the eyes of lower-grade heaven immortals from outer heavenly realms. As a result, many powers in Pyuyo Heavenly Realm had undergone a major reshuffle, forming an interest group with Yuanhua sect as the leader. In Pyuyo Heavenly Realm, one could ignore Immortal Chuan's words, but no one dared to disobey Patriarch Yuanhua's words. The number of Yuanhua sect's disciples was increasing day by day, and the number of planets under its direct or indirect control had reached more than 10. The number of energy stones, immortal stones, herbs, and spirit items kept increasing as well. Although they had lost 2 sect elders, Daoist Min and Daoist Qi, Yuanhua sect was showing signs of prosperity. Right in front of Wu Qi and Princess Xianglu, outside the atmosphere of Green Cliff Planet, two heaven immortals were busy leading a group of nascent divinity cultivators. Between them was a small hill, about 1,000 feet tall. It had 81 apertures, each filled with a large amount of immortal stones and engraved with countless runes and runes. Shaped like a bamboo shoot, the hill was translucent and shrouded in a faint layer of green light, emanating a very powerful energy wave. Two heaven immortals hovered next to it with a compass in their hands, directing the group of about 100 nascent divinity cultivators to adjust the position of the hill. Wu Qi looked into the distance, and saw a similar hill hovering in the void several thousand miles away. He scanned it with his divine will, and found that there were a total of 36 such hills outside the atmosphere of Green Cliff Planet, protecting the entire planet according to the position of the heavenly divinity. What the two celestial immortals were doing at the moment was to determine the location of the final mountain. Only then would the defensive formation be completed. Only those extremely powerful sects were qualified to construct this kind of defensive formation that completely enveloped a planet. Such a grand formation was extremely troublesome to refine and required an astronomical amount of materials. And yet, it possessed a formidable defensive power. Even the average high-grade heavenly immortal would have a hard time breaking through it. In just a few short years, Yuanhua sect actually had the overall strength to construct such a formation. It had greatly surprised Wu Qi, and he wondered where they found so many supreme-grade materials. 36 small mountains served as the base of the array. They were capable of withstanding the attack of a high-grade heavenly immortal. The materials used to make them were no ordinary materials. Each of them was the equivalent of a high-grade immortal artifact in order to withstand the power of the array. Yuanhua sect is really rich now. Wu Qi looked thoughtfully at the 36 small mountains. Smiling, he said to Princess Xianglu, they are all good materials, but it's a pity that the formation is too weak. It's just an ordinary trapping formation that draws in the power of the heavenly divinity. Oh, the mountain gate of the underhand sect still lacks a powerful protective formation. Right after Wu Qi said that, Princess Xianglu narrowed her eyes and smiled, making them look like two crescent moons. If my husband likes it, we can just rob it, she said in a crisp voice. After all, the purpose of our return is to kill and burn, so why should we be polite to them? With a flick of her sleeve, the pale purple long sleeve suddenly transformed into a sheet of strong purple light and sprinkled down. The 36 small mountains trembled, then spun and flew into the purple light, disappearing in the blink of an eye. 36 small mountains appeared out of thin air in Princess Zhongli's interstitial world. Her interstitial world was only about 1 foot in circumference, and these 36 small mountains were as small as a speck of dust in it. The two heaven immortals who were directing the formation were shocked. Chi-Chi turned around and looked at Wu Qi and Princess Xianglu, who were about 100 miles away. One of them, a Taoist with a big beard and a pair of eyes that shone like stars, cried out sternly, "Who dares to come to Green Cliff Planet and court death? Are you hungry?" Wu Qi suddenly slapped his sleeve and cried out in a deep voice. Ao Buzan quickly poked his head out from the sleeve. Smilingly, he glanced to the left and right, then said while wagging his head, "I'm hungry," but Lao Tzu dared not to come out and look for food along the way. Alas, you are having a good time all the way, but Lao Tzu is so hungry that water is flowing out of his stomach. Wu Qi was thick-skinned. When he heard Ao Buzan's teasing, he burst into laughter as if nothing had happened. Princess Xianglu was a shy girl. When she heard Ao Buzan's words, Princess Xianglu could not help but feel ashamed and angry. With her face blushing, Princess Xianglu grabbed Ao Buzan and threw him away with all her strength. Ao Buzan cried out in a strange voice, then transformed into a beam of black light and sped towards the two heaven immortals. The two heaven immortals only saw a beam of black light coming at them, and they thought that Princess Xianglu had unleashed an immortal item to attack them. Hastily, they cried out and unleashed two immortal swords that were shrouded in raging flames, slashing down towards Xiang Ao's head. Sword beams rained down like raindrops and raging flames filled the sky. Two sword beams circled around Ao Buzan and slashed wildly, causing countless sparks to shoot out from Ao Buzan's body. Even Wu Qi could not figure out the background of Ao Buzan, nor could he figure out how many trump cards he had. Although Ao Buzan's cultivation base had not recovered, and his overall strength was only comparable to a lower-grade heaven immortal, his dragon scales were ridiculously strong. Although the two immortal swords were slashing wildly around him, not a single mark could be seen on his scales. On the contrary, the edges of the two immortal swords were riddled with holes and nicks, as if they had been bitten by teeth. The two unlucky heaven immortals controlled their sword beams to circle around Ao Buzan and slash wildly. With every slash, a row of nicks would appear on their swords. When the immortal swords were damaged, the immortal souls of the two heaven immortals suffered a backlash as well. With every slash, their internal organs trembled violently, and blood sprayed out from their mouths. However, their sword beams were extremely fast, and their sword techniques were extremely fierce. In just a second, they had slashed over 100 times at Ao Buzan, and as a result, both of them had coughed out over 100 mouthfuls of blood. The pale golden immortal blood sprayed out like a fountain. It was an indescribably bizarre situation. Ao Buzan opened his mouth and swallowed the two immortal swords, then growled, "You two prodigal sons. Every mouthful of your blood essence belongs to Lao Tzu. How is Lao Tzu going to eat it after you've coughed it all out? TSK, can Lao Tzu still eat the things that come out of your mouths with your saliva?" While murmuring, Ao Buzan transformed into a beam of black light and came before the two immortals, opening his mouth and swallowing them in one gulp. Just a moment ago, he was complaining that the blood they spat out was mixed with saliva and could not be eaten, but now, he swallowed them whole. At this moment, he no longer cared about the fact that their mouths were full of saliva. Wu Qi shook his head and murmured in a low voice, "It's good enough to have something to eat. Look at that catfish flood dragon, when has she ever been picky?" Ao Buzan's ears were very sensitive. Even though there was no air in the air, he could still hear Wu Qi's murmur when Wu Qi's words disappeared without a trace. Then, he turned his head and said disdainfully, "That ugly catfish. How can she be compared to me? Lao Tzu is an ancient true dragon, and she has not even cultivated her dragon body. How can she be compared to Lao Tzu? Lao Tzu has always been particular about delicacy when he eats." While praising himself, Ao Buzan rushed into the group of cultivators, who were trembling with fear, opened his mouth and swallowed the 100 nascent divinity cultivators as well. Just a moment ago, he was bragging about how delicacy he ate, but in the next moment, he had swallowed 100 living people. Ao Buzan's face was indeed covered with a thick layer of dragon scales, and his skin was much thicker than that of ordinary people. Ao Buzan burped contentedly, then spat out a large number of clothes, shoes, and socks from his mouth. "I'm full, I'm really full," he murmured. Can I eat all the people on this green cliff planet?" Moving his front claws nimbly, Ao Buzan kept drooling from the corner of his mouth. If there are a few beautiful female immortals, I can let Lao Tzu have a good time first. What do you think?" Without saying a word, Wu Qi and Princess Zhang transformed into beams of light and descended toward the green cliff planet. When they passed by Ao Buzan, Wu Qi grabbed him by the neck and shoved him into his sleeve. Mockingly, Wu Qi flicked Ao Buzan's forehead and said, "With your body that is less than 2 feet tall, you still want to find a woman?" Ao Buzan was so angry that smoke was coming out of his mouth. Although Lao Tzu's body is small, it is strong and strong. He roared furiously. That does not depend on his size, but on his skills and experience, the kung fu that Lao Tzu has cultivated for millions of years. "Kung fu, do you know?" Princess Zhang snorted coldly and gave Ao Buzan a fierce glare. Subconsciously, Ao Buzan shrank his neck and obediently hid in Wu Qi's sleeve. After the time it took to finish a pot of tea, perhaps thinking that Princess Zhang had forgotten what had happened just now, Ao Buzan poked his head out again and murmured, "Poor Lao Tzu, even though he was reborn, he is still a young man. If Lao Tzu's old acquaintances knew about this, they would laugh at him to death. Alas, you people who have had enough to eat and drink, how would you know the pain I'm suffering here?" A thunderclap echoed out as a thunderbolt struck heavily on Ao Buzan's head, making him twitch and twitch violently. Quickly, Ao Buzan retreated into Wu Qi's sleeve, not daring to utter any more nonsense. Princess Xianglu stared fixedly at Wu Qi's sleeve for a long time. When she realized that Ao Buzan really did not say a word, she gave a cold snort and grabbed Wu Qi's hand sulkily. Two beams of light flew into Green Cliff Planet's atmosphere, and from afar, they could hear the urgent ringing of the alarm coming from Green Cliff Mountain. 2 heaven immortals and over 100 nascent divinity cultivators were killed, and the soul jade slips of these people were shattered at the same time. How could this be hidden from the cultivators of Yuanhua sect? The defensive formation on Green Cliff Mountain was activated, and the alarm was ringing. Immediately, all the cultivators of Yuanhua sect gathered on the mountain. Seeing that the entire Green Cliff Mountain was completely enveloped by the defensive formation, Wu Qi and Princess Xianglu grinned coldly. Instead of going to Green Cliff Mountain, they flew straight towards the cave abode they had built on the ocean many years ago. The purpose of their return to Green Cliff Planet was not only to settle the old scores, but also to take away some things. For example, the energy veins of various sizes on Green Cliff Planet. Chapter 635. The vast ocean was shrouded in a misty mist. A bright moon hung high in the sky, and the ocean rippled and sparkled with silvery gleams. Some fish and dragons were seen floating on the surface of the ocean, quietly inhaling and exhaling the moonlight and starlight, dreaming of awakening their sentience and cultivating into demon immortals one day. The island where Wu Qi and Princess Xianglu built their cave abode was now occupied by a few elite junior disciples of Yuanhua sect. All the restrictive spells in the cave abode were broken, and the immortal energy vein where Wu Qi hid was completely exposed. By now, the island had become a first-class blessed land in Yuanhua sect. Unless one was the most favored and had the best aptitude, no one was allowed to take even half a step into the cave abode. However, as the alarms on Green Cliff Mountain were ringing, the disciples who were cultivating in seclusion in the cave abode had long rushed to Green Cliff Mountain on their flying swords. As a result, only a few apprentice servants were left on the island, and the island's defensive formation had been activated. However, it was not as good as the one Wu Qi had constructed that day. Looking at the island down below, Wu Qi and Princess Xianglu exchanged a smile. Wu Qi pointed at the surface of the ocean and said with a leisurely smile, "Zi Xian, it's your turn. Your divine ability is perfect for this task. Instead, it's my chaotic energy that makes it inconvenient for me to attack." Princess Xianglu nodded happily. She rolled up her long sleeves, and vaguely, a 5-colored gleam could be seen wheeling on her 10 fingers. Then, she gave a clear cry, and dozens of 5-colored specks shot out from her fingertips. Suddenly, a large sheet of green smoke rushed out from the crevice on the screen-shaped island, transforming into a thick layer of cloud that shielded the entire island. Then, the 5-colored specks shot into the cloud, and suddenly, a series of explosions rang out from within the green cloud. Suddenly, huge waves rose from the surface of the ocean even though there was no wind, each reaching several hundred feet high. The green cloud was blown to pieces, and the screen-shaped mountain was broken in half. Soil and rocks were sent flying several miles high into the air, while boulders of various sizes were sent flying dozens of miles away. It startled those fish and dragons that were floating on the surface of the ocean, making them let out sharp and unpleasant cries and flee into the distance. The few Taoist apprentices who stayed on the island screamed in fear. They ran out of their caves, waving their arms and legs, and rushed to the beach along a newly built staircase on the mountain. Trembling, they found a large reef that seemed to be safe to hide on. Wu Qi gave them a glance, and was too lazy to argue with them. Casually, he drew a circle on the ocean down below. The surging ocean became as calm as before, and the area 10,000 miles in circumference became as flat as a mirror, with a bright moon clearly embedded in the crystal-like water surface. Princess Xianglu chuckled. 10 thin beams of 5-colored divine light shot out of her fingertips, smashing into the ocean around the island at lightning speed. A rumble rang out from the depths of the ocean as the beams of 5-colored divine light pierced through the thick rock stratum and bound up several large energy veins with the island as the core. If it were an ordinary heaven immortal, he or she would not be able to extract energy veins from under the ground. But, as Princess Zhanglu was a gold immortal, and she was cultivating the mysterious great Tao of ancient gods, which was in line with the natural laws of heaven and earth, every move she made was accompanied by the tremendous power of heaven and earth. As soon as the five-colored divine light touched the energy veins, they began to twist and turn like obedient dogs without Princess Zhanglu's help. The energy veins under the ocean were usually about 100 miles in diameter, and tens of thousands of miles in length. The largest energy vein among them stretched from Green Cliff Mountain all the way to the ocean, stretching hundreds of thousands of miles in length. It was truly a huge energy vein. As soon as these energy veins moved, the earth energy rushed over, the rock stratum trembled violently, and half of the Green Cliff planet was shaken violently. Countless mountains and hills collapsed, while the valleys and plains rose up and turned into new mountain ranges. In just a blink of an eye, half of the Green Cliff planet had changed completely, and the terrain had changed completely. A faint dragon roar could be heard coming from under the ocean, and a terrible wave of natural energy swept over. Wu Qi and Princess Zhanglu both had a hard time breathing, and were nearly choked by the strong natural energy that came rushing at their faces. A blinding light shot out from under the ocean. If Wu Qi had not confined the water with a restrictive spell, a tsunami of hundreds of miles high would have rolled up in this part of the ocean. The rock stratum at the bottom of the ocean, tens of thousands of miles in circumference, shattered with a deafening rumble. Tens of energy veins, connected from end to end, soared up into the sky. Hundreds of miles in diameter and tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of miles long energy veins soared into the sky like tens of giant dragons. These energy veins were glinting with a strong light, and looked hazy and incorporeal. They were composed entirely of highly compressed natural energy and immortal energy. In the core of these energy veins, dozens of dragon-shaped shadows could be vaguely seen flashing. These were the cores of the underground energy veins, and it was these dragon veins that absorbed the natural energy, the power of the sun, the moon, and the stars, transforming them into the energy veins hidden underground. A five-colored divine light surged out of Princess Zhongli's body as she separated her palms and said softly, "Half each. Devour them quickly." Wu Qi laughed and slapped the back of his head with his right hand. Immediately, a huge palm shrouded in a towering dark mist flew out and grabbed a few of the energy veins. Then, a beam of chaotic light shot out from between Wu Qi's brows and swallowed the few energy veins. Suddenly, wisps of bright light shot out from the surface of Wu Qi's body, and the interstitial world inside him went through a tremendous change. The few energy veins were sucked into his interstitial world, and were quickly absorbed and transformed by the chaotic energy. Wu Qi's interstitial world expanded by more than 100 times, and the total amount of energy in the chaotic world skyrocketed by tens of thousands of times as well. The energy surged and rocked inside Wu Qi's body, quickly transformed into chaotic energy, and filled all the meridians in Wu Qi's body. The interstitial world of a gold immortal was the most important natal treasure of a gold immortal, just like the gene dan and nascent soul of a cultivator. The difference between a gold immortal with an interstitial world and a gold immortal without one was like the difference between an emperor and a beggar. Firstly, having an interstitial world could help a gold immortal absorb natural energy to enhance his cultivation base, and it could increase the cultivation speed of a gold immortal by at least 10,000 times. Secondly, an interstitial world was a complete world. When a gold immortal was studying the great Tao of heaven and earth, he could simulate all the phenomena of the real world in his interstitial world, from which he could study the infinite mysteries. Therefore, a gold immortal who had an interstitial world could study the great Tao at least 10,000 times faster than an ordinary gold immortal. However, if he wanted his interstitial world to grow stronger, he would have to plunder a huge amount of natural energy to replenish himself. Relying on Wu Qi's own cultivation, even if he worked hard for 10,000 years, he would not be able to expand his interstitial world by much. That was what most gold immortals did. Once they developed their interstitial world, they would immediately choose some remote planets, plunder all the energy veins on those planets, and add them into their interstitial world. A good energy vein was enough to save a gold immortal tens of thousands of years of hard work. What Wu Qi was doing today was exactly the same as what those gold immortals did. But, no matter how strong their backing was, no matter how powerful those gold immortals were, they would never plunder the energy veins of a planet where an immortal sect was stationed like Wu Qi. It was a very illegal act. If it were not for the fact that Wu Qi hated Patriarch Yuanhua to the core and wanted to completely destroy Yuanhua sect's foundation, he would not have done such a ruthless thing. Wu Qi's interstitial world was filled with chaotic energy. It seemed to contain everything, but at the same time, there was nothing in it. After Princess Xianglu put the other half of the energy vein into her interstitial world, the foot-wide interstitial world suddenly expanded to about a mile in circumference. It was filled with green mountains, clear waters, lakes, and rivers, and all kinds of natural sceneries. An abundance of natural energy was roiling in Princess Zhongli's interstitial world. Gradually, natural phenomena such as wind, rain, thunder, and lightning began to take shape, and the cycle of the 4 seasons had begun in this small world. Under the control of Princess Xianglu, the largest energy vein was being compressed and condensed high up in the sky, gradually forming into a ball of light the size of a sesame seed. The tiny ball of light radiated a great deal of light and heat, hanging in the sky like the sun, bringing the small world a vigorous life force. Princess Xianglu laughed joyfully. She narrowed her eyes and pondered for a moment, then moved her finger slightly. Suddenly, thunderbolts burst out from the interstitial world in her body, filling the void with countless electric arcs. Then, the thunderbolts in the interstitial world suddenly disappeared, and a thunderbolt, about 100 feet in diameter and 100 miles long, shot out from Princess Zhongli's fingertip. It whistled through the air with a terrible rumble that nearly shattered the heaven and earth, smashing heavily onto a large island in the distance. A deafening boom rang out as the island, measuring 1,000 miles in circumference, was turned into nothingness amidst the thunderbolt. The terrible force of the thunderbolt instantly evaporated all the seawater within 10,000 miles, leaving a hole with a diameter of 10,000 miles in the vast ocean. With her interstitial world and enough natural energy, Princess Xianglu could form all kinds of destructive energy storms in her interstitial world at any time, and then release them to attack her enemies in the outside world. With her interstitial world as the medium, the speed of casting spells was several times faster than that of ordinary immortal spells, and she could also control them more flexibly and freely. Wu Qi was overjoyed when he saw Princess Zhongli's astonishing strike. The quality of the energy veins they had extracted from this vast ocean was very high, and there was even an immortal energy vein among them, which had brought great benefits to their interstitial worlds. The dragon-shaped cores in these energy veins had fused with their interstitial worlds, allowing the natural energy to be extracted and absorbed by them at any time. They did not need to cultivate deliberately, and their interstitial worlds would automatically expand and enrich themselves. Their interstitial worlds operated on their own, no different from the outside world. All kinds of mysterious auras were faintly transmitted into their divine souls, making them feel that their divine souls had become transparent, and the world in front of them had become much clearer. They looked at each other and smiled happily. Then, Wu Qi put his arms around Princess Zhongli's waist, puckered his lips, and pressed his lips against hers. Just as they were about to make out, hundreds of sword beams came whistling over from a distance, and a female voice was heard coming from afar. "How dare you, evildoers! How dare you act so presumptuously on my Green Cliff planet? You are a bunch of bastards!" At the moment, half of the energy veins on Green Cliff planet were plundered by Wu Qi and Princess Xianglu. Without them, all the natural energy would gradually dissipate, and all the land would gradually lose its vitality. On top of that, the loss of natural energy would inevitably affect the situation on the other half of Green Cliff planet. It was a perfectly fine planet, but in fact, it had already entered a state of decline. Green Cliff planet was the foundation of Yuanhua sect. How could the immortals of Yuanhua sect not be angry that the northern part of the planet had been plunged into such a state? The lady snapped, and hundreds of sword beams rained down on Wu Qi and Princess Xianglu like raindrops. Chapter 636. Wu Qi could not help but sneer as he watched several dozens of immortal items and several hundreds of spirit items, and even some lower-grade magical treasures coming down at him at the same time. After all, Yuanhua sect did not have a strong foundation. Although it had gained so many benefits, resources, and reputation, it did not have many artifact craftsmen. Perhaps, it could not even be self-sufficient in immortal items. Among the several hundred people in front of him, there were about 50 heaven immortals. Obviously, Yuanhua sect had recruited some itinerant immortals and annexed some small and medium-sized sects in the recent years. But, the number of immortal items that came down from these 50 immortals was only about 30. It was a rather embarrassing situation. Grinning coldly, Wu Qi waved his hand casually. Starshark shot up into the sky, leaving behind a silver-green beam of starlight. Countless stars in the sky emitted a strong light at the same time, while wisps of starlight pierced into the blade like sharp needles. The shadow of a green dome shark, about 100 feet long, flashed across the sky, leaving behind a waterfall of light that stretched several miles long. Shrill cracking noises lingered in the air as several dozens of immortal items, hundreds of spirit items, and magical treasures were broken by Wu Qi with just one sword strike. They exploded one after another, and the item spirits of immortal items and energies howled at the same time, sending sparks of various colors shooting in all directions. Bright sparks could be seen everywhere in the sky, as if countless fireworks were being set off. The colorful light illuminated the surface of the ocean, making it look very dazzling. The oncoming immortals and itinerant cultivators coughed up blood as they retreated. Some immortals with good eyesight cried out upper-grade immortal items in unison, their voices filled with fear and panic. An upper-grade immortal artifact. Only an upper-grade heaven immortal artifact could have such an overwhelming advantage over their immortal artifacts. How could an ordinary immortal or an ordinary immortal artifact destroy dozens of immortal artifacts with a single slash? It was a spectacular scene to see hundreds of Chi-Chi coughing blood. However, the people of Yuanhua sect, who were charging at them aggressively just a moment ago, were now dead silent. After a long while, a beautiful young woman clad in a long green dress drifted out slowly on a cloud. She forced a smile onto her face, bowed to Wu Qi and Princess Xianglu, and said, "The entire Yuanhua sect is honored to have two seniors with your presence. May I know why the two seniors have come here?" Wu Qi looked at this beautiful young woman and gently shook his head. How could he not be familiar with this woman's appearance? She was Fairy Green Melon, Daoist Qi's Dao companion. It was only because Wu Qi had offered a spirit herb that Fairy Green Melon could regain her peerlessly beautiful appearance. In the past, Wu Qi and Goddess Green Melon had been friends. But because of Patriarch Yuanhua, they had become enemies when they met again. He reached out his hand and wiped his face, restoring his original appearance. Staring at Goddess Green Melon, he cried out in a deep voice, "Fellow immortal Green Melon, summon Patriarch Yuanhua. Patriarch Yuanhua of Yuanhua sect must give me an explanation for what happened in the past." Then, he stretched his right hand out and clenched his fist. Abruptly, the ocean tens of thousands of miles in circumference soared up into the sky. A vast amount of seawater roared and rolled toward the center, then compressed at an incredible speed. Under the horrified gazes of Goddess Green Melon and all the members of Yuanhua sect, the vast ocean that stretched tens of thousands of miles in circumference, with the deepest depth of about 1,000 miles, was compressed into a acquired water in thunder the size of an egg in Wu Qi's palm. Not to mention how much energy Wu Qi had stored in this Yin thunder, the material used to refine it was the seawater of a vast ocean. Once the seawater exploded, the instantaneous impact would be more than enough to severely damage Green Cliff Planet, and any ordinary heaven immortals would be ripped to shreds by the aftershock of the explosion. Not to mention the fact that the Yin thunder had a faint black gleam flickering in it, and numerous runes were faintly visible on its surface. Clearly, Wu Qi had condensed a magical thunder rune spell in it, which made the power of this Yin thunder even more immeasurable. On top of that, it only took Wu Qi the span of 2 to 3 breaths to condense such a Yin thunder. Goddess Green Melon's eyes flickered, and she nearly fainted. She had once concocted some Yin thunders of the 5 elements. Although the water Yin thunder was not the thunder technique she was most proficient in, as it was good at restraining all kinds of fire elemental magic, she had also concocted some to protect herself. When she was concocting the Een thunder of Gui water, she had to gather all the Een water energy in the dark water cold pool, which was about 1 mile in circumference. It would take her 1 day and 1 night of hard work to compress it into a bean-sized Een thunder seed. After that, she had to carefully carve the thunder talisman in it, inject her divine sense into it, and refine it with her natal true flame. Only then could she truly concoct a Een thunder that could be activated at her will. A pond of water with a circumference of 1 kilometer would take her an entire day and night of hard work. Given her current cultivation base, she wouldn't be able to refine the water-Een energy in this vast ocean of tens of thousands of kilometers in circumference without several periods of hard work. The fact that Wu Qi could compress an ocean with just a wave of his hand showed that his cultivation base was not something an ordinary heaven immortal could compare with. Only an upper-tier heaven immortal, or even a top-tier heaven immortal, could have such a mighty power. On top of that, he had to have a very profound attainment in all kinds of thunder techniques and water manipulation techniques to be able to achieve such an unimaginable feat. Goddess Green Melon had once heard of the legend of refining an entire ocean into a Een lightning orb. It was said that the core disciples of great immortal sects with gold immortals would use this Een lightning orb to protect themselves when they ventured out. It could easily kill mid-grade heaven immortals and below. That was a gold immortal. Goddess Green Melon felt a stream of cold air rushing from the top of her head to the soles of her feet, swirling around the soles of her feet before rushing back to the top of her head. She shivered and stared at Wu Qi, the smile on her face looking uglier than a crying face. Her lips trembled as she howled hysterically, "Wu Qi! You can't be that little boy, Wu Qi! Why you? Oh heaven, the primordial gold talisman could not kill you, and now you can condense an ocean into a thunder. What kind of monster are you?" The divine gleam in her eyes was disordered, and white foam was spraying out of the corner of her mouth. Clearly, she had fallen into a state of half-madness. Immortal cultivators paid particular attention to gradual progress, and every bit of magic power and understanding of the heavenly Tao had to be cultivated painstakingly. Apart from some lucky fellows who had inherited the legacy of ancient fiends and cultivated quickly with the cruelest methods of the fiend Tao, who had ever heard of a monster who could cultivate to a realm like Wu Qi in just a few years? When she thought of what Patriarch Yuan Hua had done to Wu Qi, and what Patriarch Yuan Hua was doing now, Goddess Green Melon broke down on the spot. She waved her arms incoherently and rambled incessantly. All of a sudden, she untied a spirit beast bag from her belt, tore open the talisman seal on its opening, pointed at Wu Qi and screamed, "Kill him! Kill him! Kill him! I'll let you go." Wu Qi looked at the spirit beast bag in surprise. Then, he heard a phoenix cry, and a beam of red light rushed out of the bag. A huge bird flew out of the bag. It was about 10 feet long, fat like a bear that was about to hibernate. It looked exactly like a phoenix, but the aura emanating from it was mixed and impure. With sleepy eyes, the bird threw its head back and cried, "Woman, remember your promise. I'll kill him for you, but you have to let me go. I'll go find my master." At the sight of the bird, which was as fat as a ball, Wu Qi and Princess Zhanglu burst into laughter at the same time. The bird was none other than Little Kaer, the descendant of the phoenix that Wu Qi had bought from Green Cliff Immortal Market many years ago. When Princess Zhanglu fled Green Cliff Planet in a hurry, Gold Horn, Silver Horn, and the others had followed closely behind Princess Zhanglu. However, Little Kaer was very naughty, and did not leave with Princess Zhanglu at the critical moment. As a result, when Yuan Hua sect broke the island's defensive formation and seized the opportunity, she was imprisoned by Patriarch Yuan Hua with an immortal spell and sent to Goddess Green Melon. Princess Zhanglu was delighted to see Little Kaer flying out of the island. She unleashed a beam of 5-colored divine ray, which instantly removed all the restrictive spells in Little Kaer's nascent divinity. Little Kaer recognized Wu Qi and Princess Zhanglu as well. She let out a wild cry of joy and rushed toward them in a beam of red light. Princess Zhanglu hugged Little Kaer, who had grown up a lot. She rubbed the feathers on her head and said with a smile, "You've learned how to speak now. You've improved a lot, Little Kaer." Little Kaer let out a few long cries of joy. She rubbed her beak against Princess Zhongli's cheek intimately, then stared at Wu Qi with her big round eyes. Wu Qi grinned and patted little Kair on the head. With a flip of his palm, he produced a supreme-grade fire element immortal stone and gave it to little Kair. A joyful cry that shook the heaven and earth rang out of little Kair's mouth as she shrunk back to the size of a sparrow and hopped onto Princess Zhongli's shoulder. Beaming with joy, she spread her wings and held the fist-sized supreme-grade immortal stone in her arms. Ao Buzan poked his head out from Wu Qi's sleeve. He gave little Kair a furtive glance, then suddenly grinned and said, "The bloodline of the phoenix? And a fledgling on top of that. TSK, this is the so-called heaven-sent marriage between a dragon and a phoenix. We are fated. How should I put it? Merciful Buddha, this is fate. Little girl, you and Lao Tzu are fated. In your previous life, you must have broken 108,000 wooden fishes before you could meet such an outstanding husband like Lao Tzu." Wu Qi bowed his head and gave Ao Buzan a look, then shoved him back into his sleeve with a finger. Then, he opened his mouth and inhaled. A frightening suction force was unleashed from the interstitial world inside Wu Qi's body, sucking all the air, water, natural energy, sand, rocks, trees, flowers and grasses within several tens of thousands of miles into his mouth. Even Goddess Green Melon and the other disciples of Yuanhua sect were swallowed into his interstitial world. Grinning coldly, Wu Qi and Princess Zhonglu ran at top speed across Green Cliff Planet. Wherever they went, they dug up everything within 3,000 miles, leaving not even a single blade of grass behind. Apart from the mortals, all the cultivators, the palaces and pavilions, the beautiful mountains and rivers, the underground energy veins, the mines, and even the herb gardens planted by the disciples of Yuanhua sect were devoured by Wu Qi into his grayish interstitial world. As vast as Green Cliff Planet was, the mortals were only left with an oasis and a small energy vein. These resources were more than enough for these mortals to live and multiply on Green Cliff Planet. However, Green Cliff Planet was completely cut off from cultivators. This barren planet could not support even a nascent divinity cultivator. Over the next few days, Wu Qi and Princess Zhonglu traveled around. One by one, dozens of planets under Yuanhua sect's jurisdiction were plundered by them, just like what they did to Green Cliff Planet. The planet with a huge energy stone vein, which Yuanhua sect had fought for many years ago, was also plundered by both of them with mighty magic power, leaving not even a single lower-grade energy stone behind. After interrogating the disciples who stayed behind in Yuanhua sect and learning that Patriarch Yuanhua was in a secluded cultivation with a group of elite disciples on Myriad Immortals planet, Wu Qi and Princess Zhonglu immediately left for Myriad Immortals planet. Half a month later, Wu Qi and Princess Zhonglu, who had plundered all the assets of Yuanhua sect, arrived outside White Cloud Planet in Minor Heavenly Circle Realm. Chapter 637. Outside White Cloud Planet, numerous planetary ships were shuttling back and forth in the void like a meteor shower. Some of them flew into the planet's atmosphere, while some left the planet and flew into the distant starry sky. Every hour, there would be dozens of planetary ships flying in and out of the planet. Judging by the busy traffic, White Cloud Immortals sect must have turned the planet into a transportation and trading hub in Minor Heavenly Circle Realm, relying on the power of Yuanhua sect. Hovering in the void, Wu Qi's divine will had enveloped the entire planet. Countless data poured into him like a tidal wave. Wu Qi had digested all the hundreds of millions of evil spirits he had absorbed on Pangu continent. At the moment, his divine soul was extraordinarily powerful, allowing him to easily analyze all the data that poured into him. In just a blink of an eye, everything on White Cloud Planet was under his control. In the past, there were many dynasties living side by side in the mortal world. But today, the planet had been unified by a certain dynasty. The capital of this dynasty was built at the foot of White Cloud Peak, and its name was Yuanhua. The surname of the imperial family was Zi, and the current emperor possessed the cultivation base of early-stage Jin Dan realm. Clearly, it was a dynasty built by the descendants of Patriarch Yuanhua. The emperor, who sat on the dragon throne and handled the affairs of the state, had an extremely poor aptitude. Logically speaking, it was impossible for him to cultivate to the realm of Jin Dan. As the Jin Dan in his body was very impure, it was obvious that he was forcibly condensed with some medicinal pills or external force. When Wu Qi scanned the imperial palace with his divine will, the emperor, who was called Purple Moon Fox, was counting the number of ores and energy stones mined in the past half a year with his courtiers, preparing to hand them over to White Cloud Peak. Those who guarded White Cloud Peak were some people Wu Qi was very familiar with. Their leader was Immortal Greenstaff, who had brought a few heaven immortals and several dozens of nascent divinity cultivators to guard White Cloud Peak. In front of the mountain was the imperial capital of Yuanhua dynasty, and behind the mountain was a large immortal market, where tens of thousands of cultivators and immortals were trading. The market was bustling with people, and there were at least tens of thousands of shops in it. It was even livelier than Green Cliff Immortal Market on Green Cliff Planet. Laughing, Wu Qi was about to rush into White Cloud Planet and use the method he had used on Green Cliff Planet when his expression changed abruptly. On the White Cloud Planet, in a house in a remote town, a group of fierce-looking men dressed in crimson brocade clothes were attacking a group of less than 20 people with weapons in their hands. There were about 300 to 400 men in embroidered robes, each of them wearing soft armor underneath their embroidered robes. There were about 100 of them with crossbows in their hands, and they had already surrounded the entire courtyard so tightly that not even a drop of water could trickle through. The others held their swords and sabers in their hands as they charged forward like an endless tide, killing the less than 20 strong men and forcing them to retreat step by step. They were about to rush into a small building that these strong men were guarding. Wu Qi focused all of his divine sense on this small town in an instant. His tremendous divine sense caused the surrounding spiritual energy to become chaotic. Clouds fluttered in the sky, strong winds blew all around, and muffled sounds of thunder came from the distant horizon. The strong wind rolled up sand and grass and drowned the entire small town. The sand and rocks in the storm were like arrows, hitting and shattering the roof tiles. Every household hastily closed their doors and windows, and no one dared to walk outside. The strong wind made the men in embroidered robes lose their footing, and some of them were sent flying into the air, slamming into the surrounding walls and trees. The embroidered clothed men's formation was thrown into disarray. The sturdy men, who numbered less than 20, hastily reorganized their ranks. They firmly guarded the door of the small building behind them. The strong wind stirred up by Wu Qi was extremely strange. One after another, those men in embroidered robes cried out in a disorderly manner, but no one knew what they were yelling about. By the time the black wind blew past the courtyard with a whistling sound, Wu Qi was holding Princess Zhang Li's hand and standing firmly in the courtyard. Coiled around Wu Qi's neck, Eo Buzan was winking at little Kair, who was standing blankly on Princess Zhang Li's shoulder. A man, a woman, a dragon, and a phoenix. It was a very strange combination. The strong wind stopped abruptly, and those men in embroidered robes stared blankly at Wu Qi and his company. Their leader, a burly man who stood over 10 feet tall and held a sawtooth scythe in his hand, frowned as he strode forward, cupped his fist and bowed to Wu Qi. "Seniors, we are the embroidered imperial guards of Yuanhua Heavenly Dynasty, and we have been ordered by His Majesty to hunt down the leaders of the rebels, Li Yifeng, Zi Qianyan, and the pair of bastards. Please do not interfere in the internal affairs of Yuanhua Heavenly Dynasty." After a brief pause, the burly man fished out a jade tablet from his waist and flashed it. He injected a shallow stream of energy into the jade tablet. Immediately, a large cloud of white smoke sprayed out from the jade tablet. The white smoke slowly wheeled around the burly man, giving this stout and burly man, whose face was filled with a fierce and murderous aura, an air of immortality. "White Cloud Immortal Sect of White Cloud Planet is Yuanhua Heavenly," he said proudly. Wu Qi interrupted the burly man with the most direct action. He patted Eo Buzan on the head, then pointed a finger at the burly man. Eo Buzan followed Wu Qi's advice, opened his mouth, and swallowed. A plume of dark mist sprayed out from his mouth and enveloped the burly man. A cry of alarm rang out as the burly man was sucked into Eo Buzan's small mouth by the dark mist. Eo Buzan closed his mouth and chewed slowly. Cracking noises of bones breaking could be heard coming from Ao Buzan's mouth, and blood was dripping down from the corner of Ao Buzan's mouth. The burly men in embroidered robes were so frightened that their legs turned soft. They had never seen such a cruel scene before. A living person was actually swallowed by a monster that looked like a black snake in one bite. How could this small body, which was only 2 feet long, swallow a burly man who was more than 10 feet tall? The few burly men in embroidered robes cried out with twisted faces, "Monster! Monster! Quickly, get the immortal masters to help us." A stream of flame towered high into the sky, exploding several tens of miles above the ground. A crisp sound rang out, and a white light sphere, about 1 mile in circumference, exploded. The light was so bright that it could be seen clearly by all the people within several hundred miles. Not long after that, a few white beams could be seen flashing amidst the clouds in the distant sky. After that, tens of sword beams pierced through the clouds, flying towards the small town at top speed. Wu Qi smiled coldly. These cultivators were just putting on an act. When he scanned the small town with his divine will, Wu Qi found that both Li Yifeng and Zi Qianyan were seriously wounded, and could not even move. These cultivators were too proud and arrogant to deal with 2 seriously wounded men, so they sent these burly men to capture them. Now that Ao Buzan had swallowed the burly man, the others had sent out an urgent warning message, and only then did these cultivators rush over in a hurry. With a smile on his face, Wu Qi opened his mouth and shot out a beam of chaotic spirit light. One after another, the burly men in embroidered robes near the house flew up into the sky with strange cries, then were pulled into Wu Qi's interstitial world. Inside the chaotic interstitial world, a large amount of natural energy gathered and transformed into ancient divine runes that represented the meaning of suppression, imprisonment, and slumber, firmly branded on the brows of these burly men. Before they could see where they were, they had already fallen into a deep sleep. Without Wu Qi's help, they would never wake up again. These men, together with those from Yuanhua sect captured on Green Cliff Planet, would be brought back to Panga Continent by Wu Qi for a blood sacrifice. The target of the sacrifice would be Lei Meng, who had promised to become the ancestral god of East Sea County. Currently, Wu Qi had a small influence in East Sea County. Although he had 50,000 soldiers under his command, their overall strength was very weak. If he wanted to use them, he would have to hold several dozens of large-scale blood sacrifices. When they saw Wu Qi spew out a bright beam from his mouth and swallowed all the burly men into his stomach, the dozens of cultivators in the sky thought that Wu Qi was some demon or devil cultivator, and that he had devoured all of them. A handsome young man in a white robe with a cultivation base of peak stage nascent soul realm snapped, "How dare you, evildoer!" Then, Chi-Chi pointed his finger at the cultivators, and a dozen sword beams mixed with some lower-grade spirit items and magical treasures came smashing down from above. Wu Qi gave a cold snort. Suddenly, 6 green fiend shadows emerged from his body, and the 6 celestial fiend puppets flew up into the sky while howling. When the sword beams, spirit items, and magical treasures fell on them, they were immediately sucked into their bodies. These celestial fiend puppets could devour all kinds of ores to strengthen themselves, and these flying swords and magical treasures that had been refined with the right method were the best tonic for them. After the flying swords and magical treasures were devoured by the puppets, Wu Qi once again breathed out a large sheet of spirit light from his mouth. The dozen of cultivators who did not have the time to register their names had their vision blacked out, and lost their sense of direction. They were then sucked into Wu Qi's interstitial world and suppressed with ancient divine runes. After dealing with all these imperial guards and cultivators with ease, Wu Qi turned and looked at the dozens of burly men who were still standing at the entrance of the building. Their bodies were covered in blood, yet they refused to retreat. Wu Qi nodded his head in admiration. After scanning these burly men with his divine will, Wu Qi said in a deep voice, "You are a group of loyal men who know how to be grateful to you. You will be rewarded with good fortune in the future." Although they were facing opponents who were dozens of times stronger than them, they still fought to the death despite being severely wounded. These burly men were very loyal and useful. All of them had practiced some superficial cultivation techniques, and the strongest among them was only at the level of peak stage Xiantian realm. It was not a pity to cripple their cultivation base. Therefore, Wu Qi planned to let them practice the true body of heaven and earth scripture, and then hold a blood sacrifice to improve their overall strength. When they saw Wu Qi walking toward the building, these burly men raised the weapons in their hands at the same time. A burly man, who had his face slashed twice and a row of his teeth broken, howled with a hoarse voice, "Halt! My emperor's temporary quarters are here, and no one is allowed to come close." Looking at the ordinary two-storied building made of green bricks, Wu Qi suddenly burst into a loud laughter. "Li Yifeng, Zi Qianyan, you do have a group of good subordinates." Wu Qi laughed aloud. With a shake of his Taoist robe, the building crumbled to pieces. Li Yifeng and Zi Qianyan, who were lying on a soft couch in the building, flew up into the air along with the strong wind. Before those burly men could see what was happening, they had already landed right next to Wu Qi, and Wu Qi had his palms pressed on their backs. These burly men, who had been fleeing with Li Yifeng and Zi Qianyan for years, roared in terror. Then, they raised their weapons and charged toward Wu Qi desperately. Wu Qi chuckled, while Li Yifeng cried out in wild joy, "Stand down, all of you." Zi Qianyan even burst into tears. "Master, you have to seek justice for us disciples," she said as she wept. Those burly men were taken aback, but soon, they threw down their weapons happily, dropped to their knees and kowtowed. Princess Xianglu waved her hand without batting an eyelid. A beam of five-colored divine ray sprinkled down and landed on these severely wounded burly men. Chapter 638. The main hall of the former imperial palace of Gu Tai dynasty was brightly lit. All the doors and windows of the hall were open, and the bright light shone into the distance for miles. Li Yifeng and Zi Qianyan sat on the thrones in the center of the hall, while several hundred people stood around Qi. Some of them were dressed in rags like beggars, and some were dressed in green clothes and hats like commoners. None of them were dressed in luxurious clothes. They were the ministers of Gu Tai dynasty in the past. 3 years ago, Yuanhua heavenly dynasty swept across White Cloud planet, completely destroying many dynasties in just half a month. It was as if Mount Tai was pressing down on them, and it caught everyone by surprise. Li Yifeng and Zi Qianyan had fled with a pair of twins, and several hundred loyal guards. As for the other civil and military officials of Gu Tai dynasty, some were dead, some surrendered, and some had fled. Currently, only these several hundred loyal officials could be summoned by Li Yifeng and Zi Qianyan, who had the courage to pay a visit to Gu Tai dynasty's forbidden palace in the middle of the night. It was obvious that these former ministers of Gu Tai dynasty had not been living a good life in the past 3 years. Their properties were seized by others, and some even had their private houses occupied. They had no choice but to bring their families and become homeless. They were no different from refugees. Apart from a few lucky ones who managed to find a way to make a living, the rest were living a miserable life. Wu Qi was standing next to Li Yifeng's throne, with Li Yifeng and Zi Qianyan's children nestled on each side. The two little dolls were not very old, having just passed their 5th birthday. They were so pink and tender that they looked like a pair of dolls made of silver. They were very likable. While pinching the cheeks of the two babies, Wu Qi looked at the several hundred officials in the hall with a smile on his face. His heart was bursting with joy. 50% of the high-ranking officials and nobles of Gu Tai dynasty had surrendered, and the other 50 were killed in the disaster. The remaining few hundred loyal officials were the middle and lower-ranked officials in the imperial court, and they were the officers in charge of various ministries and departments. To put it bluntly, they were all talented people who could do practical things. What Wu Qi lacked right now was talents. As a vast East Sea county, with a land area several times the size of the entire White Cloud planet, there were many things that needed people to take care of. By bringing these people to Pangu continent, Wu Qi would have a group of administrative talents who could do practical things, and he could also bring Li Yifeng and Zi Qianyan, the two chief administrative officers. Was there anything more worthwhile than this? Wu Qi even had some evil thoughts in his mind. Should he recruit a few more emperors from outer heavenly realms as his disciples, and secretly sponsor their enemies to destroy his dynasty in a few years? Then, he would avenge his disciples, and after infinitely increasing their loyalty, he would bring these emperor's disciples and their subordinates to Panga continent. After that, he would bring them to Panga continent. It seemed that this matter could really be done, but he had to be very careful. It would be ugly if he gave himself away. Putting aside the absurd idea for the time being, Wu Qi gave Li Yifeng a look. Li Yifeng was still immersed in his excitement when Wu Qi descended from the sky like a divine soldier a few hours ago, rescuing him, his wife, his son, and the last loyal guard. Seeing Wu Qi giving him a meaningful look, Li Yifeng took a deep breath and cried out in a deep voice, "My subjects, are there any old ministers of Gu Tai who have not arrived yet?" The ministers in the great hall exchanged glances, then fell to their knees at the same time and bowed to Li Yifeng and Zi Qianyan. "Your Majesty," said a high-ranking civil official who was in charge of Gu Tai dynasty's sacrificial ceremony in the past, "Your Majesty, apart from those rebels and traitors who defected to Yuan Hua's puppet dynasty, all the people who were able to come are here." Li Yifeng breathed a deep sigh and looked at Wu Qi with a complicated expression. Wu Qi nodded slowly and said gently, "You are all loyal ministers of Yifeng. Since you did not betray Yifeng this time, I will definitely give you some benefits. I will give you 1 day to gather all your people and loyal and reliable subordinates. After that, I will bring you to a good place." After pondering for a moment, Wu Qi nodded and said, "In that place, each of you will be of great use, and the benefits you can get will far exceed your imagination." Suddenly, muffled footsteps could be heard coming from afar, as a great number of lanterns and torches formed into a flaming dragon and rushed toward the great hall. Following it were the hoarse shouts of generals, and the grunts of soldiers who responded to the orders given by the generals. Judging from the noises, there were at least 100,000 soldiers surrounding the imperial palace from all directions. Moreover, several tens of thousands of soldiers had already rushed into the palace and were coming toward the great hall. Wu Qi looked at Li Yifeng with a smile and said, "Are these your armies?" Li Yifeng rose to his feet, bowed respectfully to Wu Qi, and said, "Master, you can do whatever you want with me." Clenching his teeth tightly, Li Yifeng said fiercely, "All the generals and soldiers who were loyal to me have died a long time ago. The ones who are still safe and sound here are either the soldiers of Yuan Hua dynasty, or the rebels who betrayed me and joined the enemy. Master, you can do whatever you want with them." Wu Qi smiled, nodded, and said, "That's good. I happen to be short of people." Laughing loudly, Wu Qi opened his mouth and sprayed out a great sheet of chaotic energy, which instantly enveloped the entire territory of Gu Tai dynasty. Countless officials and soldiers in cities, villages, and towns, as long as they were serving Yuan Hua dynasty, could not help but fly thousands of miles into Wu Qi's mouth while letting out strange cries. All of them were imprisoned in the interstitial world and suppressed by Wu Qi with the primordial divine rune. Wu Qi could not do something like abducting mortals and sacrificing them, for he was not a ruthless and unscrupulous immortal of the Fiend League. But when it came to these people who had betrayed his disciple and served his disciple's enemy, Wu Qi had every reason to kill them, and he would not feel any burden on his conscience. Amidst the energy, countless figures could be seen wailing as they flew into Wu Qi's mouth. In just a few breaths of time, all the officials, soldiers, and even their families in the territory of Gu Tai dynasty were imprisoned in Wu Qi's interstitial world. The total number of them might have exceeded 1 million. Not a single one of the armies gathered outside the great hall was left behind. The rumbling footsteps disappeared abruptly, and the sudden silence made all the courtiers in the great hall shiver as if they were in a nightmare. Li Yifeng cried out joyfully, "Master's mighty divine ability." Zi Qianyan and all the courtiers bowed and worshipped Wu Qi. None of them had ever seen such a mighty divine ability before. Even though some of the members of Gu Tai dynasty's imperial clan were disciples of White Cloud Immortal sect, the strongest among them was merely at the nascent soul realm. How could they have the almighty divine ability like Wu Qi? For the next 24 hours, Wu Qi asked Ao Buzan to stay by Li Yifeng's side to protect the courtiers and military officers of Gu Tai dynasty as they gathered their people. Within these 24 hours, several hundred courtiers had gathered several tens of thousands of their people, and some of the family members of some courtiers who were killed in the calamity had come to join Li Yifeng as well. Naturally, Li Yifeng did not reject any of these loyal subordinates, and recruited all of them into his team. Wu Qi made it very clear that he was in need of manpower at the moment, and as long as they could work, he would take them in as long as they could read and write. At least, the family members of these courtiers were literate since they were young, and they had some basic administrative abilities. They were much better than the people on Pangu continent, who were still in a state of chaos and simplicity. Even the servants of these courtiers were very familiar with all kinds of affairs, and could lead a few ordinary people to do many things. During the 24 hours, Wu Qi and Princess Zhanglu followed the usual practice on Green Cliff Planet, looting 99% of the energy veins on White Cloud Planet, leaving only a small energy vein that stretched 10,000 miles long for the common people on White Cloud Planet. All the other mines were looted as well, and some famous sceneries were moved into Princess Zhang Li's world in the ring, without leaving a single one of them. It was not only natural resources, mountains, rivers, and the like, but Wu Qi and Princess Zhanglu would never let go of those extraordinarily gorgeous palaces and pavilions wherever they went. Imperial cities were uprooted one after another, and magnificent manors belonging to the nobles had disappeared without a trace. With a little modification, these imperial cities and manors could be transformed into a magnificent Taoist Rite temple. It would save Wu Qi a lot of time and effort. Apart from these things, there were also some isolated villages deep in the mountains and forests of White Cloud Planet. The villagers were simple and honest, and did not know much about the affairs of the world. Wu Qi did not hesitate to kill all the villagers in these isolated villages. There were about 1 million of them in total. These people could be used to replenish the population of East Sea County. The villagers were simple and honest, which made them easy to control. If it were those shrewd and cunning people in the cities, Wu Qi would not dare to let them go to Pangu continent. If they were not careful enough, Wu Qi might leak his secret. After a day and a night of looting, Wu Qi and Princess Zhanglu had almost emptied White Cloud Planet. When the few continents on the planet could no longer find anything good, Wu Qi and Princess Zhanglu rushed to White Cloud Peak with a murderous look on their faces. They took the lead in looting all the shops and businesses in the Immortal Market, and also moved several thousand cultivators who did not manage to escape into their interspatial world. As Wu Qi and Princess Zhanglu plundered everything on White Cloud Planet, they had caused the natural energies to become extremely chaotic, and caused countless earthquakes and other natural disasters. Those immortals and cultivators who had nothing to do with Yuanhua sect had long since left the planet. Naturally, those who were still in the Immortal Market were the loyal disciples of Yuanhua sect. As there was no need to reason with these cultivators, Wu Qi simply abducted all the people in the Immortal Market and brought them away. Just as Wu Qi and Princess Zhanglu were about to go to the capital city of Yuanhua dynasty and abduct all the people in it, Immortal Greenstaff, who was standing on a green cloud with a complicated expression on his face, stopped before Wu Qi with a group of immortals from Yuanhua sect. Arm in arm, Wu Qi and Princess Zhanglu looked at Immortal Greenstaff with a cold grin on their faces. Clenching his jaws tightly, Immortal Greenstaff stared fixedly at Wu Qi from head to toe. After a full 15 minutes, he opened his mouth and was about to say something. But, right when he opened his mouth, Wu Qi sprinkled a beam of bright light, abducting Immortal Greenstaff and all the people behind him. "I'm not here to reason with you." Looking at the capital city of Yuanhua dynasty that had fallen into chaos, Wu Qi said in a ferocious voice, "I'm here to seek revenge. Immortal Greenstaff, you owe me. I, Wu Qi, have never done anything wrong to Yuanhua sect." With a casual point of his finger, the entire capital city of Yuanhua dynasty was uprooted from the ground, together with a layer of rock several hundred miles in circumference, and was imprisoned in Wu Qi's interstitial world. Next, it was Myriad Immortals Planet's turn. Chapter 639. Myriad Immortals Planet. Myriad Immortals Planet, which used to be full of vitality, was now nearly empty. Except for the deep forests, deep ponds and valleys, and the bottomless trenches in the vast ocean, except for some lucky demons and ghosts hiding in these perilous places, all the other creatures had been turned into white bones. The former capital of Great Yan, Ji City, had sunk hundreds of miles into the ground, and turned into a deep pit 10,000 miles in circumference. Countless corpses were piled up at the edge of the pit, and a great amount of blood flowed out from them, filling the pit to the brim. The land hundreds of thousands of miles in circumference was covered with mountains of corpses and seas of blood, and not even an inch of land could be seen. Among the corpses, there were not only human skeletons, but also the skeletons of countless wild beasts, birds, fishes, and even inch-long shrimps, 3-centimeter-long centipedes, half-foot-long green snakes, and caterpillars the size of fingers. Countless living beings were piled up here. Some had turned into bones, some were half-rotten, and some had just been killed. Blood of various colors was constantly oozing out of their bodies and flowing into the huge pit. High up in the sky, dark clouds were pressing down. They were only about 1,000 feet above the ground, and the dark clouds were 100 miles thick, with a radius of hundreds of thousands of miles. It was as if the distance between the sky and the ground was only this short. This part of the world gave people an extremely oppressive feeling. From time to time, a blood-red light and a devil flame would flash across the dark clouds. The red blood-red light and the green devil flame would make a whistling sound as they swept across the sky, bringing with them a pungent smell of blood. In this hellish land, there were no flies, vultures, wild dogs, maggots, or those creatures that liked to live on the corpses. Because all the living beings, including the flies, vultures, wild dogs, and maggots, had been killed and turned into a part of this sea of corpses and seas of blood. Oh heavens! Open your eyes. Are you really going to wipe out this branch of mine? Amidst a long, forlorn howl, a pitch-black flying sword soared into the sky and chopped off the head of a longbow man, who stood 1,000 feet tall. A thick column of blood sprayed hundreds of feet away, pouring into the huge pool of blood. Tiny bubbles rose and rose in the viscous blood pool, as if it had happily received the new blood. The one who let out the long, forlorn howl was an old longbow man, whose skin was cracked like pine bark, and who was only one breath away from death. The old man stood hundreds of feet tall, holding a wooden staff in his hand, throwing his head back and howling wildly. The corners of his eyes were cracked, and some faint traces of blood slid down his cheeks. There were no tears or blood flowing out of them. The old man was so old that his bodily functions had dried up, and there was not much blood left in him. He was so old that his bodily functions had dried up, and there was not even much blood left in him. Next to the old man, about 50 to 60,000 longbow men were lined up in neat rows, stepping over the bodies of their people that piled up like a small hill as they walked step by step towards the huge pool of blood. As long as they were within 30 feet of the blood pool, the flying sword would spiral down and behead them. The old man kept howling and howling, but the heaven was speechless, and no one answered his howl. The eyes of those longbow men were clear, and their faces were filled with anger and fear. They knew exactly what was happening around them, but they could not control their own bodies. An evil force had taken control of them, forcing them to walk slowly toward the pool of blood. These longbow men were the last remaining people on Myriad Immortals' planet. When the sudden attack came, the people of Longbow Kingdom, who possessed formidable overall strength, woke up a few slumbering elders in their clan. Working together, those elders, who possessed the cultivation base of Heaven Immortals, defeated the enemies who spied on them over and over again. However, the repeated battles drained the strength of these old men, drained their blood essence, and the enemies that attacked them became stronger and stronger. When the last elder was killed by the enemy with an upper-grade immortal sword that emanated a scorching heat, the longbow men, like the rest of the people on Myriad Immortals' planet, came to this nightmarish place, walking step by step toward death. The old man who was howling into the sky was the last oracle of the longbow men on Myriad Immortals' planet. Watching his people being killed one after another, and the souls of all his people not being able to ascend to heaven, but being sent into the blood pool together with their blood, the old oracle knew what the enemy was trying to do, and that his clan had reached a critical moment of life and death. Burning his own soul, he broke free from the evil force that imprisoned him. He threw his head back and let out a long howl, trying to seek help from the ghosts and deities in the world to save his people. The heaven was speechless, and the ghosts and deities were at a loss for words. In the land shrouded by dark clouds, not a single ghost or deity responded to the old oracle's call. Tens of thousands of longbow men who were lucky enough to survive burst into tears at the same time. They wept bitterly for the death of their own people, for their own fate, and at the same time, for the imminent extinction of their own longbow people. Among the tens of thousands of human races, longbow men were perhaps the most united, traditional, conservative, and stubborn human race. Among the human race, only longbow men never attacked their own people. All longbow men were as close as brothers. Although they were divided into different tribes, all longbow men were united. When they saw their people being brutally slaughtered, the hearts of all the longbow men who were still alive were broken. Tears of blood rolled down their cheeks, and the deafening cries even raised the dark clouds in the sky tens of feet high. A strange laughter was heard coming from a distance. The flying swords that were flying at high speed in the sky suddenly stopped moving, and a blood-red cloud descended from the sky. Clad in a black Taoist robe with a white skull embroidered on the chest, Patriarch Yuanhua held an immortal sword that was emitting scorching flames in his hand. Laughing wildly, he flew towards the longbow men on the blood-red cloud. "Why are you crying? Why are you crying?" Patriarch Yuanhua shook his head and said with a smile, "You are the only one left on this planet, and you can die together with all the living beings on this planet. What are you unhappy about? After you die, you can turn into my immortal energy and help me break through the realm of gold immortal. What are you unhappy about?" Pointing triumphantly at the pool of blood, Patriarch Yuanhua laughed wildly and said, "With the help of this pool of blood, I have a great hope of breaking through the realm of gold immortal with my blood seize technique." Hee hee. A blood-red gleam flashed in Patriarch Yuanhua's eyes as he frowned and said, "Strange, why do I know the blood seize technique? Why do I know how to build a pool of blood? Who am I? Am I Patriarch Yuanhua? No. Am I Lord Blood Ocean? Wrong, am I the ancient celestial fiend, Li Shuezi? No, who am I?" After tilting his head and pondering for a while, Patriarch Yuanhua suddenly slapped himself on the head and said with a strange laugh, "Why do I care so much? Once I have cultivated the great Tao of gold immortal, Senior has promised that an emissary will come to welcome me and make me his disciple." Back then, Senior's promise was worth 1,000 gold. After working hard for so many years, old ancestor finally has the opportunity to enter Senior's tutelage. Looking triumphantly at the longbow people who were crying bitterly in front of him, Patriarch Yuanhua shook his head and suddenly burst out laughing. After that, he suddenly paused. He spun a few times on the spot, then suddenly beckoned at the dark cloud above him. A blood-red cloud burst out from the dark cloud, measuring about 1 acre in circumference, shrouded in a green ghost flame. Several dozens of stone pillars were placed in a straight line on top of the cloud, each of them carved with countless images of evil ghosts. Patriarch Jiang Yun, his 2 wives, Qing Xia and Bai Wu, the 3 old Taoists Qing Xian, Qing Yi, and Qing Shen, together with a group of core disciples from White Cloud Immortal Sect and Tranquil Vimla Sect, were all tied up on the stone pillars. Their 7 apertures were locked by the ghost flame that shot out from the evil ghost skulls engraved on the stone pillars, and they could not move or speak. Patriarch Yuanhua flew up to Patriarch Jiang Yun with a smile on his face and said, "Jiang Yun, you are my disciple. Obey me and kill the rest of these longbow people with your own hands. When I attain the great Tao of gold immortal, you will also get a share of the benefits." With a wave of his hand, Patriarch Yuanhua removed the ghost flames from Patriarch Jiang Yun's face and asked, "Are you willing to obey me?" Patriarch Jiang Yun, whose eyes were flickering and on the verge of a mental breakdown, stared blankly at Patriarch Yuanhua for a long time. Suddenly, he howled at the top of his voice, No. Even if I have to die, I'll never obey you, you fiend. You are not Patriarch Yuanhua. You are a fiend from some foreign domain. You are Old Demon Blood Ocean. You are a beast. You have killed everyone on Myriad Immortals planet." Patriarch Yuanhua frowned. He slapped Patriarch Jiang Yun in the face and scolded in a low voice, "You ungrateful fool. I've only killed a few people. Of course, I am Patriarch Yuanhua. Otherwise, Who am I? Old Demon Blood Ocean. TSK, why does this name sound so familiar? Is it me? Not me. Who is that ancient celestial fiend, Li Xuezi? My master. Am I Li Xuezi's personal disciple? After muttering to himself for a while, Patriarch Yuanhua shook his head, sighed, and said, "Why do you care so much? I am me. Of course, I am me." With a cold snort, Patriarch Yuanhua turned to look at Qing Xian, Qing Yi, and Qing Shen, then said with a smile, "If Jiang Yun doesn't obey me, neither will you." Qing Xian, Qing Shen, and Qing Yi could not move or speak, but their eyes shone with a bright gleam, filled with a determination that they would rather die than submit. Patriarch Yuanhua shook his head. He did not want to waste his energy to undo the restrictive spells on their faces, so he just sighed deeply and said, "You refuse to take the path of life, but insist on taking the path of death. Are the so-called morality and justice really that important?" As he spoke, Patriarch Yuanhua suddenly burst into wild laughter. With one swift motion, he tore open Bai Wu and Qing Xia's corsets and said, "Excellent. Why do you care so much? I'm going to be a gold immortal, and I'm going to attain the righteous fruit of a gold immortal. Ha, Jiang Yun, oh Jiang Yun, let me have a good time with your two Dao companions. Since you are determined to die anyway, let me enjoy them before you die, so that I won't waste two beauties." Bai Wu and Qing Xia's faces fell dramatically, while Patriarch Jiang Yun twisted and struggled frantically. "Patriarch Yuanhua, you are an old beast who is worse than a pig or a dog. You are not a human," he snapped. The roar was so loud that it tore Patriarch Jiang Yun's vocal cords, causing blood to spray out of his mouth. Laughing evilly, Patriarch Yuanhua grabbed Bai Wu and was about to push her onto the blood cloud. Chapter 640. After the time it took to finish a pot of tea, Wu Qi and Princess Zhanglu walked out from a secret cave abode located in the depths of Meng Mountains. This cave abode was one of the secret abodes Wu Qi had prepared for himself many years ago, and it was a hiding place for Wu Qi in case he needed to flee for his life. The cave abode was protected by a formation laid out by Wu Qi to conceal his aura. Although his cultivation base was not strong at that time, and the power of the formation was not strong, it was more than enough to conceal one's aura. Meng Mountains was so vast that ordinary heaven immortals could never search every inch of it with their divine will. Therefore, a mere cave abode of several hundred feet in circumference could still be perfectly hidden, and was not damaged in any way. Right after they walked out from the cave abode, the faces of Wu Qi and Princess Zhanglu fell instantly. Ao Buzan had long squeezed out from Wu Qi's chest, and was standing on Wu Qi's shoulder in a daze. Even little Kair, who had been standing on Princess Zhang Li's shoulder and digesting the immortal stone given to her by Wu Qi a few days ago, raised her head in astonishment and kept chirping uneasily. Wu Qi had once read an ancient poem. It described the scene of no birds flying over 1,000 mountains, no traces of men left on 10,000 paths. It described the scene of no birds and no men left after a heavy snowfall. Although no birds could be seen in such a desolate mountain after a heavy snowfall, at least a few bird chirps could be heard, and there were at least some fishes leaping in the river next to the fishermen on the boat. But at this moment, Meng Mountains was in a dead silence. No one could be seen on the empty mountain, and no fish could be seen in the green water. Not even the sound of insects could be heard from the bushes under the trees. All kinds of plants such as flowers, grass, and trees could be seen, but not a single animal could be found. Wu Qi, Princess Zhanglu, Ao Buzan, and little Kair spread out their divine will at the same time. In just a flash, Wu Qi and Princess Zhanglu had covered the entire Meng Mountains with their divine will, but what they saw made their faces turn pale. There were no humans, no beasts, no birds, no fishes. Meng Mountains was the paradise of all demons. But at this moment, not a single demon could be found in all the valleys and valleys of Meng Mountains. The cave abodes of the few demon kings in Meng Mountains had been burned down into a shabby cave, and a few mountains were pressed down into the ground by some mighty magic. A few years ago, when Yen Dan left Myriad Immortals' planet with his subordinates, the 5 demon kings of Great Yen had also left with most of their trusted subordinates. But, they were reluctant to abandon their cave abodes which they had managed for thousands of years, so they left many demons to guard them in the mountains. But now, it seemed that their cave abodes were destroyed, and the demons and fiends under their command were naturally unfortunate. From its source all the way to its estuary, Wu Qi carefully scanned every inch of Longyuan River with his divine will. However, the water was completely clean. Apart from countless aquatic plants rolling and writhing in the water, not even a single shrimp could be found. The once bustling and powerful aquatic clan of Longyuan River was completely gone. Even the spirit tapeworm river, which had given Wu Qi a very deep impression, the countless spirit-sucking tapeworms that gave him goosebumps when he thought about them, had vanished completely. Meng Mountains, a vast mountain that stretched for tens of millions of miles, was now completely devoid of any living creature. Wrong, it was not that there were no living creatures. Those flowers, grass, and trees were still alive, but all the animals were gone. Wu Qi had dug 300 miles deep into the ground with his divine will, but even in the deepest underground cave, there were no living creatures. The fishes and shrimps that lived in the dark rivers in the depths of the earth had also vanished without a trace, and the earthworms and worms that lived in the mud layer were gone as well. What is going on? Wu Qi turned to look at Princess Zhang in astonishment. Princess Zhang Li's face was extremely unsightly as well. Suddenly, she closed her eyes and walked to a 10,000 years old tree with a trunk so wide that it would take at least 100 men to wrap their arms around it. She pressed both hands on the trunk of the tree, and from her palms, a faint greenish divine ray was injected into the trunk. The huge ancient tree began to sway even though there was no wind. Its branches were waving happily, and its leaves were rustling noisily, as if there were countless tiny mouths talking at the same time. Wu Qi looked at all this with a blank expression. It was an art of psychic communication taught to him by Princess Zhang, but he just could not learn it no matter how hard he tried. He could barely communicate with those Yin spirits and wild ghosts, but when it came to communicating with these flowers and trees, Wu Qi just could not figure out the principle behind it. On the contrary, Princess Zhang did not need any practice at all. When her bloodline was awakened, she naturally possessed this divine ability. Fire, monstrous flame. Huge flying swords streaked across the sky. Slaughter, slaughter, slaughter. The Longyuan River turned red. Those powerful demons and devils were killed, their blood collected in jade bottles, and their souls taken away. Those weak living beings were captured, carried away by the wild wind and thrown out of the forest. An aura that made Wu Qi uneasy was spreading out from every corner of Meng Mountains. Not only the 10,000 years old tree, all the flowers, trees, and other plants in the vicinity of Meng Mountains were awakened at the same time. Although they could not move or speak, they were born with a little bit of intelligence. They sensed some extremely tragic things that happened in Meng Mountains, and they immediately sent out the aura they sensed to Princess Zhang through the mysterious connection between plants. The grayish aura came rushing over from all directions, injecting into the body of the 10,000 years old tree. The 10,000 years old tree let out a shrill wail. Its branches and twigs gradually withered and withered, its leaves quickly turned yellow, and even the weeds around it were affected by the aura and fell to the ground. Even without Princess Zhang telling him, Wu Qi could clearly sense the enormous aura contained in the aura. This aura was simply too strong, and a little too tragic. All the plants were wailing, and a monstrous resentment was gathering over. Even this giant tree, whose trunk was so thick that it would take 100 men to wrap their arms around it, could not withstand the resentment, and its life force was rapidly fading away. In the Tao of heaven and earth, nature was of utmost importance. For seasons came and went, flowers bloomed and withered, herbivores ate the grass, carnivores hunted the prey, and their excrement and rotting bodies became the fertilizer for the flowers and trees. This was how simple the self-circulation of nature was. A tiny bit of innate divine light transformed into all the living beings in the heaven and earth, including animals and plants. Who said that plants were heartless? These plants contained a tiny bit of innate spirituality, and in fact, they had a very deep affection for the heaven and earth, for all the living beings in the world, for the animals that had been around them for years, and for those demons that had become sentient beings. Those animals played around them, lived around them, and gave birth under their protection. There were countless giant trees that had grown up in the depths of Meng Mountains, some hundreds of years, some thousands of years, and some tens of thousands of years old, and all these were recorded in their growth rings. When these animals suddenly disappeared without a trace, when their aura vanished completely, when their souls vanished from the heaven and earth, these plants also sensed it, and a monstrous resentment was born in their bodies. If it were not for the fact that Myriad Immortals' planet was surrounded by a perilous environment that prevented the aura of these plants from spreading out, just the resentment of the countless flowers and trees in Meng Mountains would have immediately triggered some unpredictable changes. The so-called flying frost in 6 moons was just a supernatural phenomenon that was sensed by the heaven and earth. The intense resentment accumulated in Meng Mountains was more than enough to make some existences on Myriad Immortals' planet suffer the wrath of the heaven. Wu Qi took a deep breath, sensing the terrible resentment in the gray aura. Nodding slowly, he reached out a hand and pressed it on the rapidly withering giant tree in front of him. "Don't die, stay alive," he said in a deep voice. "If your old friend is really gone, I'll take you to a place full of life. You are not allowed to die. Stay alive." An enormous amount of energy essence poured out of Wu Qi's body and kept flowing into the giant tree's body. A dazzling green light burst out of the giant tree's body, and its withered body began to fill up rapidly, while its yellow leaves quickly turned green. A ball of black light burst out of Wu Qi's palm, sucking in all the resentment coming from the countless flowers and trees in Meng Mountains like a black hole. Chaotic energy could absorb and digest anything. If this monstrous resentment were to fall on other immortals, it would be a vicious thing that would destroy their immortal souls. But, after being sucked into Wu Qi's body, his chaotic energy quickly digested the resentment, and in the blink of an eye, it was devoured by Wu Qi. "It's Patriarch Yuan Hua." He sensed some information from the digested resentment, and recognized Patriarch Yuan Hua's appearance, as well as the immortal sword in his hand that emitted a scorching flame. Gradually, some of the events that happened that day began to play out in his mind. Patriarch Yuan Hua was so angry that he personally went to Myriad Immortals' planet to hunt down Wu Qi's relatives and clan members. In the end, Wu Qi had no relatives in Great Yen. Furious and ashamed, Patriarch Yuan Hua began to eradicate everything related to Wu Qi. Star-picking city was razed to the ground, and Great Yen was completely destroyed. However, when Patriarch Yuan Hua found his way to Meng Mountains and was about to lay his hands on Meng Village and Little Meng City, Wanying Dragon King had already sneakily brought away all the people of Meng Village and Little Meng City. His heart was burning with anger, but he could not vent it out completely. As a result, Patriarch Yuan Hua became even more bedeviled. However, he had massacred Star-picking City and hundreds of major cities of Great Yen, killing hundreds of millions of innocent people. Because of that, Patriarch Yuan Hua had finally drawn the attention of some fiends from the outer heavenly realms, and was possessed by some unknown existence. It was in the depths of Meng Mountains that Patriarch Yuan Hua was completely bedeviled. Many nearby flowers and trees had witnessed the process of him being possessed by the fiend. What followed was a brutal massacre and looting. Patriarch Yuan Hua kept murmuring the terms blood sea technique and pool of 10,000 spirits blood pool, and muttered something about breaking through the realm of gold immortal and becoming the disciple of some unknown existence. He kept murmuring these things over and over again, stirring up a monstrous wave of blood in Meng Mountains. With his face turning pale, Wu Qi quickly condensed his divine sense into a thread and swept it in the direction of Ji City. Meng Mountains had been slaughtered, but what about Great Yen? Princess Zhongli's face fell as well. Suddenly, a strong green wind rushed out of her body, bringing along a thread of Princess Zhongli's divine sense and rushing toward Ji City. Princess Zhongli's affinity with nature was stronger than Wu Qi's, so her divine sense had arrived at Ji City before Wu Qi. What greeted her eyes was a scene that was even more horrible than hell. It made Princess Zhongli's face turn pale, and she suddenly coughed out a mouthful of blood. The people of Great Yen. Suddenly, Princess Zhongli's body turned hazy and translucent. She transformed into a thundercloud and flew toward Ji City. With a sway of his body, a monstrous dark fiend energy suddenly towered into the sky around Wu Qi. Patriarch Yuan Hua, you old beast, you deserve to die. With a flicker of his body, Wu Qi exercised the Kuafu chasing the sun step, and with just one step, he had arrived outside Ji City. Chapter 641. Corpses piled up like mountains, and blood flowed like oceans. Rotting corpses were piled up on the ground, filled with air. Pale bones, colorful internal organs, silver tendons, and hair that were coiled up in a mess. Even in hell, there would not be such a scene. Countless blood bubbles of various sizes kept popping up in the huge blood pool, as if there was a stove underneath heating it up. A strong smell of blood lingered in the air, so strong that even the wind could not blow it away. The smell condensed into a pale red baleful aura in the air, in which countless twisted figures could be vaguely seen twisting and struggling, and pale faces could be seen flashing across from time to time. The souls of the dead were screaming and roaring wildly, but there was no sound at all. Tens of thousands of longbow people stood stiffly where they were, unable to move. Laughing and laughing, Patriarch Yuan Hua pushed Bai Wu onto the blood cloud and began to tear her clothes at a leisurely pace. Bai Wu's face was pale, and her eyes were bloodshot. She opened her mouth and tried to bite her tongue to commit suicide, but Patriarch Yuan Hua reached out a hand and grabbed her jaw. What an ignorant little girl. Patriarch Yuan Hua laughed in a strange voice. You have the body of an immortal. How can you compare it to a mortal? A mortal will die if he cuts his tongue, but you will only look ugly when you do. How can you look ugly before I enjoy you? He ran his finger across Bai Wu's cheek, and a beam of blood-red light seeped into it. Bai Wu's facial muscles lost all strength, and she could only lie stiffly on the blood cloud and let Patriarch Yuan Hua do whatever he wanted. Patriarch Jiang Yun roared hoarsely. He opened his mouth so hard that the corner of his mouth was torn open, and a great deal of blood kept gushing out of the wound. Patriarch Yuan Hua was about to violate Bai Wu when he suddenly turned his head and saw the blood oozing out of Patriarch Jiang Yun's face. He laughed evilly and said, how could I forget this? Beautiful women, beautiful scenery, and wonderful things need hot blood to liven up the atmosphere. With a point of his finger, 100 tall and sturdy Longbow Kingdom men walked slowly to the edge of the blood-red cloud, standing in a circle and surrounding the cloud that was about an acre in circumference. The burly men bent down stiffly and pointed their heads at Patriarch Yuan Hua. Accompanied by a sharp sword cry, the black flying sword that was circling in the sky whistled down, and like a sharp knife cutting through tofu, it chopped off 100 large heads. Patriarch Yuan Hua, Patriarch Jiang Yun, Bai Wu, Qing Xia, and even the old Taoists, including Qing Shen, Qing Xian, and Qing Yi, were all covered in hot blood. In particular, most of Bai Wu's clothes had been torn off, and her fair skin was covered in a thick layer of blood. She was covered in blood from head to toe, giving off a bloody, ferocious, and strange beauty. Patriarch Yuan Hua was excited. Laughing wildly, he quickly untied his belt and took off his Taoist robe. The old Longbow Oracle, who was waving his hands and crying at the top of his lungs, suddenly raised his hands, threw his head back, and hissed, "The ghosts and deities of heaven and earth, the souls of our ancestors, and all the living things in the world can testify. Today, my clan swears a bloodline oath. If anyone can kill and expel this demon, save my clan from death, and preserve the descendants of my clan will be slaves and servants for generations to come. We will be loyal and do anything for that person." Patriarch Yuan Hua's fierce and cruel means had plunged all the Longbow people present into complete despair. At the critical moment of the extinction of his clan, the old shaman couldn't care less. He swore the most sacred bloodline oath, using the future of his clan's descendants to swear that as long as someone could save his clan and not let the bloodline of his clan go extinct, he was willing to pay the heaviest price. Even if they were slaves, in the face of the bloodline inheritance, nothing counted for anything. Tens of thousands of Longbow men howled and wailed at the top of their voices. Although they could not move their bodies, and they could not control the muscles on their faces, it did not stop them from howling out from their chests, from their hearts, like the howling of the north wind. The long howl spread in all directions with an eerie chill, and wherever it passed, the blood energies and baleful chi were torn to pieces by it. Just as the old oracle was swearing the bloodline oath and tens of thousands of Longbow people were howling at the same time, Wu Qi exercised the Quafu chasing the sun step and arrived at the edge of the blood pool. Glaring angrily at the vast blood pool in front of him, and then at the piles of corpses that stretched for millions of miles, Wu Qi's hairband broke inch by inch, and his long hair stood straight up even though there was no wind. A powerful force poured into his hair, making it flutter and produce a crisp ringing sound like the clashing of blades and spears. "Damn you, old fogey!" Wu Qi gave a low growl as he spun his body sideways and slammed his body toward Patriarch Yuanhua. He had used all his strength in this attack, and his body streaked across the void like a mad flood dragon as he thrust his shoulder toward Patriarch Yuanhua's back. Faint purple mist rose from all over his body, and dragon scales kept emerging under his skin. Wu Qi had exercised both the true body of heaven and earth scripture and the heavenly dragon transformation technique to the extreme. Patriarch Yuanhua did not expect someone to ambush him on Myriad Immortals' planet. He had killed all the local demons and fiends on Myriad Immortals' planet, and even if there were a few survivors, they were no match for him. Therefore, they had long been hiding in secret places, not daring to come out. He had killed all the living beings on Myriad Immortals' planet, even those tiny shrimps. So, how could someone ambush him? All his attention was attracted by Bai Wu's beautiful body. Just as Patriarch Yuanhua was about to taste the delicious meat, Wu Qi struck out like a clap of thunder, thrusting his shoulder into Patriarch Yuanhua's back. A crisp crack rang out, and Patriarch Yuanhua's body exploded. There was no flesh or bone in his body, and as soon as he exploded, he turned into a cloud of blood mist that swirled and screamed as it shot into the sky in a beam of blood-red light. Vicious curses poured out of the fleeing blood-red beam of light. Patriarch Yuanhua cursed the heavens and the earth, cursing everyone he could find. He cursed all kinds of vicious words that were difficult to describe at the moment. As long as he could remember the names of people, whether they were his children, grandchildren, or his disciples, he would curse them without hesitation. No one was spared. A great sheet of blood-red light and ghostly flames came whistling through the dark clouds, while a stream of blood as thick as a bucket rose into the sky from the pool of blood below. The beam of blood-red light fused with the blood-red light, and ghostly flames, and before long, it had turned into a blood-red cocoon about 10 feet in diameter. Wu Qi gave a cold snort as he raised a hand and unleashed a grayish-white beam of cold air. The cold air condensed into a blade in midair, then transformed into a xianbing blade, about 10 feet long, as thin as a cicada's wing, and no more than 3 inches wide. It sped through the air with a beam of white light and hacked onto the blood-red cocoon. It was an offensive divine ability found in the Darkeen water scripture, the Darkeen divine blade. It was a blade formed from the pure Een energy of the world and one's own pure immortal energy. It was extremely cold, and was the best at restraining some evil and poisonous magic. It had a powerful lethality that could scare ghosts and deities away. As the blade passed through the cocoon cracked in half. Patriarch Yuanhua, who had just regained his human form, gave a muffled snort as the blade pierced through his chest. A large piece of white ice immediately froze his bloody chest, and a cold air poured out of it, freezing the surrounding blood and evil energies into snowflakes. Patriarch Jiang Yun and the others who were tied up, as well as Patriarch Yuanhua, all stared at Wu Qi as if they were looking at a ghost. "Wu Qi, you little punk!" Patriarch Yuanhua roared at the top of his voice. Patriarch Jiang Yun and Bai Wu were able to speak now that their restrictive spells had been lifted. Both of them cried out Wu Qi's name at the same time. They could never imagine how Wu Qi, who had a weak cultivation base when he left, could possess such a strong overall strength in just a few years, shattering Patriarch Yuanhua's Dharma body with just one strike. Had it not been for the strange and unpredictable fiend technique Patriarch Yuanhua cultivated, which made his Dharma body very different from an ordinary immortal body, the strike alone would have killed him. Fiend energy rolled and rolled around Wu Qi, rising into the sky in a black mist. When the surrounding blood and evil energies were touched by the fiend energy gushing out of Wu Qi's body, they plunged into the fiend energy and were digested, turning into a part of it. His vast divine sense spread in all directions, enveloping the entire mountain of corpses and sea of blood. Inch by inch, Wu Qi examined some things in the depths of the mountain of corpses and sea of blood, including the runes and talismans that were hidden very well. There was something strange about the blood pool in front of him. Patriarch Yuanhua had sent a wisp of his divine sense into it, and he seemed to be deploying some evil and bizarre restrictive spells. Without hesitation, Wu Qi's divine sense plunged into the blood pool and began to compete with the wisp of Patriarch Yuanhua's divine sense for control. No matter what Patriarch Yuanhua was going to do, Wu Qi just had to destroy him completely. He could not let him succeed. Wu Qi did not want to waste so much blood essence, which was the blood of countless living beings on myriad immortals' planet. If he used it as a sacrifice, it would bring him great benefits. With his hands clasped behind his back, Wu Qi stared at Patriarch Yuanhua silently. All he could think of was to use his divine sense to fight with Patriarch Yuanhua's divine sense in the blood pool. Patriarch Yuanhua had already laid out all sorts of restrictive spells in the blood pool, so when his divine sense rushed into it, it immediately caused the blood pool to churn and churn up into monstrous waves. Patriarch Yuanhua hovered motionlessly in midair. He clearly sensed a terrifying divine sense that was thousands of times stronger than his divine sense was seizing control of the blood pool inch by inch. Patriarch Yuanhua's expression flickered. Gnashing his teeth, he sent all his divine sense into the blood pool as well. He could no longer care about killing the remaining tens of thousands of longbow people. He needed to activate the blood pool immediately. Looking at Wu Qi hovering in midair, the old oracle suddenly dropped to his knees and cried out, "Immortal, we have sworn a bloodline oath. If you can save us and save our clan from being wiped out, we will serve you loyally for generations to come." Bloodline oath? The Longbow people's bloodline oath? Wu Qi, who was worried about the lack of potential in East Sea County due to its sparse population, was overjoyed. He quickly turned his head and moved Akka to the old oracle as he said happily, "That's great. Since you are loyal to me, I'll definitely make your clan grow stronger. Ha, a mere puppet curse is nothing to me." Then, he pointed his finger out. A great sheet of chaotic spirit light shot out of his fingertip, transforming into countless primordial divine runes and smashing into the bodies of the Longbow people. Then, a series of explosions rang out, and black smoke rose from the bodies of the Longbow people as they suddenly regained their ability to move. Wu Qi laughed and said, "I've saved you today. Let's see who can kill you now." Then, he opened his mouth and shot out a beam of chaotic spirit light. Tens of thousands of Longbow people felt their bodies lightened as they were dragged into Wu Qi's interstitial world at the same time. Patriarch Yuanhua roared furiously. The blood essence and soul of one Longbow man was equal to the total amount of blood essence in tens of thousands of ordinary people. By saving tens of thousands of Longbow people, Wu Qi had taken away the blood essence and soul of hundreds of millions of ordinary people. Patriarch Yuanhua could not care less. His body transformed into a beam of blood-red light and plunged into the blood pool. Immediately after that, a colossal fiend's statue made of blood rose from the pool. The fiend's statue stood about 100 miles tall, shrouded in a towering stench of blood. As soon as it appeared, it threw a punch at Wu Qi. Chapter 642. It was hard to tell what the fiend's statue looked like, but it was covered in a layer of blood that was hundreds of feet thick, making it hard to see its true form. As soon as he threw out a punch, all the blood energies within 1,000 miles immediately rushed toward his fist as if it had gone mad, transforming into something that looked like a steel plate, covered with sharp triangular spikes, and smashed down toward Wu Qi with a gust of wind. Wu Qi laughed and was about to fight the fiend's statue head-on. His true body of heaven and earth mantra and heavenly dragon transformation technique had already reached the peak of the heaven immortal realm. It was a common thing for him to shatter a star with one punch. He was in the mood to weigh the pros and cons of this fiend's statue. But, before he could throw out his punch, a beam of 5-colored light flashed across from the side. Princess Zhongli had arrived. Princess Zhongli's pretty face turned cold as she saw the giant fiend throwing its fist toward Wu Qi. The 5-colored flame in her eyes shot out thousands of feet away like a volcanic eruption, causing the wind and clouds within 10,000 miles to change color. Large dark clouds quickly gathered in the sky and came crashing down from the sky. Countless thunderbolts as thick as water buckets smashed down, smashing the clouds above the pool of blood and smashing them to pieces. A sheet of purple light shot out of Princess Zhongli's fingertip as she softly chanted a ballad with a simple rhythm. Vaguely, countless spirit lights swirled around her, and suddenly, countless thunderbolts the size of human heads condensed in the purple light, smashing onto the giant fiend's statue like a rainstorm. Earth-shaking explosions could be heard one after another. Every single thunderbolt was incredibly powerful, and the shockwaves generated by each thunderbolt could reach hundreds of miles away. Countless thunderbolts blasted on the golem's body, blowing blood out of its body. Large amounts of blood were evaporated by the thunderbolts, turning into blood-red mist and rising into the sky. Countless imprisoned souls in the blood let out miserable howls as they were shattered by the thunderbolts, turning into countless fireflies that drifted away in all directions. Patriarch Yuanhua's shrill howl rang out from the depths of the blood pool. "Wu Qi, you little punk. You've killed my beloved disciple. I'll definitely kill you today." Wu Qi sneered again and again. He clenched his fists, and the wind between heaven and earth roared and quickly gathered on his fists. His fists were shrouded in a hazy green light, and not long after, they became dazzling, like two small suns that no one dared to look directly at. In a radius of 10,000 miles, whirlwinds of sheep horns suddenly rose up. The sharp whistling of the wind was so loud that it hurt people's ears. With a loud shout, Wu Qi pressed his hands downwards. 2 balls of green light whizzed out one after the other, and crashed into the blood pool with a strong gust of wind. A cyan storm erupted, and this part of the world suddenly became a world of wind. Wu Qi silently recited the various essentials of the Song of Gale. His limbs and bones seemed to have become hollow like bamboo, while the strong storm shuttled back and forth in his body, gradually drawing the surrounding wind into countless 100-mile-long wind blades that slashed and slashed wildly in the blood pool. The blood pool, measuring 10,000 miles in circumference, was torn to pieces by the wind blades, and more than half of the restrictive spells that Patriarch Yuanhua had placed under the pool were destroyed by Wu Qi's violent attack. Using his divine will, Wu Qi quickly controlled the blood energy in the surroundings and condensed them into primordial runes. Numerous runes emerged one after another, and a faint blood-red light rushed out from the depths of the blood pool. Patriarch Yuanhua was hiding in the depths of the blood pool, and his control over the blood pool was starting to weaken. Whether it was in terms of cultivation base or attainment of the Tao, Wu Qi was now far stronger than Patriarch Yuanhua. Patriarch Yuanhua, who had become a fiend, acted more on instinct, and his every move was irrational. Therefore, it was a piece of cake for Wu Qi to deal with the current Patriarch Yuanhua with brute force. Not only that, Princess Zhongli was constantly striking down countless thunderbolts, each of which was the divine thunder of subduing fiends of the primordial Tao of divinity, which was specially used to deal with all kinds of evil fiends. The thunder magic of the primordial Tao of divinity was condensed directly from the power of nature. Although it was less subtle and ingenious in structure than the thunder magic of immortals, it was more direct, more domineering, and more in line with the profound principles of heaven and earth. Therefore, its lethality was more direct and terrible. The huge fiend's statue had been smashed to pieces by Princess Zhongli, and now the thunderbolts were drilling into the blood sea. Princess Zhongli's divine sense, which was more dexterous and delicate than Wu Qi's, had turned into a huge net and covered the blood sea, using it to track Patriarch Yuanhua's movements. The divine thunder of subduing fiends, which had an amazing lethality against evil fiends, was shuttling back and forth in the blood sea with Princess Zhongli's divine sense. Countless purple thunderbolts were weaving back and forth, dyeing the vast blood sea with a faint layer of purple. Suddenly, Princess Zhongli's divine sense discovered a blood shadow flashing past at high speed in the depths of the blood sea. Thousands of divine thunder of subduing fiends rushed over at high speed, clinging to the shadow and exploding at the same time. A hoarse howl of agony rang out from the bottom of the blood sea as Patriarch Yuan Hua's true form was torn to pieces. Countless drops of blood shot out in all directions, most of which were turned into nothingness by the exploding thunderbolts. Each drop of blood was the manifestation of Patriarch Yuan Hua's natal energy essence. Now that most of the blood sea was turned into smoke, Patriarch Yuan Hua's vitality was severely damaged. After letting out a few shrill howls, Patriarch Yuan Hua's true form hid on a dark altar made of bones in the deepest part of the blood sea. While absorbing the blood nearby to heal his body, he gritted his teeth and looked at the chaotic blood sea around him. The wind blades controlled by Wu Qi were hacking and slashing in the blood sea like lightning bolts. These wind blades were a great threat to Patriarch Yuan Hua. He saw with his own eyes that a few corpses floating in the blood sea were hit by one of the wind blades, and then tens of thousands of green wind blades of various sizes immediately rushed up and shredded the corpses into the tiniest particles. Then, hundreds of purple thunderbolts swarmed over, and the thunderbolts quickly exploded and turned the tiny particles into nothingness. The vast pool of blood had completely turned into a world controlled by Wu Qi and Princess Xianglu. Patriarch Yuan Hua could only hide on the core altar, struggling at death's door with the protection of the broken blood-red flag behind him. This tens of feet long and wide blood-red flag was slowly fluttering in the blood-red water. Whenever a wind blade or lightning bolt approached, the flag would shake slightly, and the surrounding blood-red water would tumble, sending the wind blade or lightning bolt hundreds of feet away in another direction. The change of space was extremely magical. Even with the current divine abilities of Wu Qi and Princess Xianglu, they did not discover Patriarch Yuan Hua, who was protected by the flag. It showed how powerful the original form of the flag was. But now, it was riddled with hundreds of holes of various sizes, and the flagpole was badly damaged by some divine weapon. It looked as if it had been bitten by a few mad dogs. The power of the flag was far weaker than when it was in perfect condition. "You little bastard! You little bitch!" Patriarch Yuan Hua trembled with rage. "You've come to Myriad Immortals Planet? What about White Cloud Planet? Where is Green Cliff Planet? Damn it! I should have killed that little bitch myself that day. I should have taken her by force. I should have sowed the seeds myself, and I could have reaped great benefits." Brandishing his fists, Patriarch Yuan Hua growled furiously, "A moment of carelessness has cost me the whole game." Patriarch Yuan Hua howled in exasperation, then his voice suddenly became very soft and feminine as he said, "But, how could I lose? I, Lord Blood Ocean, am the descendant of Li Xuezi." No, I am Li Xuezi, the ancient celestial fiend. How could I possibly lose?" Pointing at the void with both hands, Patriarch Yuan Hua said in a strange voice, "Just wait and see." The Emperor of the Celestial Court. The 5 Emperors of 5 Directions. Xianyuan's sword is a good treasure. I can't believe my blood-draining fiend flag could not withstand its slash. Ah! What a headache! Who does Xianyuan's sword belong to? Who are the 5 Emperors of 5 Directions? The Emperor of the Celestial Court. Isn't he dead? Taking a deep breath, a thin beam of blood-red light suddenly shot out from between Patriarch Yuan Hua's brows, within which a tiny blood-red figure could be vaguely seen sitting cross-legged. He cried out in a low voice, "I can't care so much anymore. I need to extract the power of souls from the pool of blood to restore my fiend's soul, and then I'll deal with the rest later. I must avenge this. I'm not going to suffer any losses." Wu Qi and Princess Xianglu were using their divine abilities to search for Patriarch Yuan Hua in the pool of blood. But, as Patriarch Yuan Hua was protected by the blood-draining fiend flag, they could not find his true form no matter how hard they tried. For a moment, Wu Qi was a little anxious. Suddenly, he gave a loud cry as his body grew to about 100,000 feet tall. Then, with a twist of his body, in front of the stunned Patriarch Jiang Yun and the others, he transformed into a 100,000 feet long, gold and silver dragon python of fire and ice. A ferocious and savage aura spread out of Wu Qi's body. Judging by Wu Qi's current appearance and sensing the aura in his body, it was clear that Wu Qi was a real beast at the moment. He was no longer an immortal with a strong cultivation base. Patriarch Jiang Yun roared, "Wu Qi, are you really a dragon python that has cultivated into a human form?" Wu Qi did not answer. Suddenly, a huge tumor bulged out of his neck. He was gathering all the power in his body, transforming it into the unique Xian Bing divine energy of dragon pythons, and was about to spray it out to freeze the whole pool of blood. He did not believe that Patriarch Yuanhua could survive in the blood pool if it was frozen. But, Princess Zhanglu flew into a rage. She pointed a finger at Patriarch Jiang Yun and snapped, "You are the dragon python that has cultivated into a human form. Your whole family, from the old to the young, are all dragon pythons that have cultivated into a human form." Standing on Princess Zhang Li's shoulder, little Kea was also twittering and cursing at Patriarch Jiang Yun, and then she spat at him with great force. Ao Buzan stood on Wu Qi's head with all four claws, staring at little Kea with a distressed look. "You are not a lady, but you do have the bloodline of the phoenix, don't you?" Lao Tzu only cares about his own happiness. Why should he care so much about a lady or not? How am I going to deal with this little chick? I don't know where to start if I keep a tight watch on her. Hovering in midair, Wu Qi prepared for a full quarter of an hour. Then, a white beam of light, about 1 mile in diameter, shot whistling through the air and hit the blood pool. The blood pool froze abruptly, and then countless ice cubes of various sizes appeared out of thin air, quickly freezing the blood pool into a blood-colored ice cube. Right at this moment, the souls of the billions of living beings in the blood pool disappeared at the same time. A great suction force came from the core of the blood pool, sucking all the souls into it. A very fine beam of blood-red light shot out from the frozen ice cube, and a monstrous fiend aura slowly spread out. Hee. Patriarch's fiend's soul has finally recovered by 30%. 30% of my fiend's soul is more than enough for me to roam freely. Let me kill this little beast first, then enjoy your little bitch. After that, I'll extract the endless blood essence in this blood pool to restore my fiend energy." Suddenly, the beam of blood-red light flickered. Wu Qi, Princess Zhanglu, Ao Buzan, and little Kea froze at the same time, and then their bodies fell from the sky and fell to the ground. The scene before their eyes suddenly turned into a boundless sea of blood, and their divine souls had been sucked into an unknown space. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.